Have a seat, Eli. We're going to start.
Okay, sorry. Thanks. I'll take down this side of the room. Does this mean I get more votes?
Like people are really excited
Okay.
Or Kat can start.
You're just in time, Kat.
This is the cool
Oh,
stuff.
I was about to start, but you can do the honors.
Why don't you go ahead, just so I can.
Okay. Well, while our chair gets herself situated, let me kick off the meeting. I'm Chris Smith, Vice Chair of the Planning and Sustainability Commission, and this is the May 23rd meeting of the Commission. Our agenda this evening is items of interest from commissioners, director's report, consent agenda consisting of approving the minutes from May 9th, a briefing on the Southwest Corridor Equitable Housing Strategy, and what we hope will be our last session on the Central City Plan. So let's begin with items of interest from commissioners. Eli?
Well, Chris does a wonderful job of reminding us of sad and dire things that happen in the city. So I thought I would take a picture of this on the way in today on my bike and just remind us of where we might otherwise be if we were not dedicated planning commissioners. And also, if you go to the next shot here, to show this is, and this is on the way in here. We have an absolutely packed deck. And just to speak to the latent demand for ways to get out in lovely weather like this for people who are not on the Planning Commission.
There's nobody in the water.
Not that many. Not that many. They're all suited up for it, and I think that some of them are going in and out.
All right, Gary?
I just wanted to say a few words. This is my last meeting, unless I get re-recruited if we don't get done with the Central City Plan tonight. But so I just wanted to say a few words on the event of my last meeting. Being an old guy, I believe in transitions. So, and really what I wanted to say, it's really been, I checked with Julie today to find out when I actually started up on the commission, and it was the fall of 2010, so nearly 7 years now. And I just wanted to express what an honor it's been to serve on the commission, to serve with you all and with your predecessors. The members of the commission have been great. You all have always brought in very differing views, but done so in a really civil and public-minded fashion. And I think this has become a place of really genuine dialogue and problem solving. And so I think in many ways is a model for what government service can be about. I want to give a kudos also to the Bureau staff who has supported and who we have supported over the years here. It's really been delightful to have work done that's of such high quality and really thoughtful and deep. So again, I think it's a model for how things can be done well in government. Also, the rest of us have had, all of us, I and the rest of us have had an opportunity to work on a variety of important topics. And for me, coming from public health, this stuff has all been new to me. And I just wanted to raise an abbreviated list and acknowledge the expansion of my vocabulary from this. So, and this was just going through my email archives. So, parking, climate action plan, citywide tree project, eco-roofs, neighborhood centers, Powell Boulevard safety, RICAP, short-term rentals, West Hayden Island, Portland plan, comprehensive plan, and its good friend LCDC, quadrant plans, urban renewal areas, Pembina, fossil fuels policy, Vision Zero, litigation record retention, Green Loop, mixed use, trail alignment, home energy scores, inclusionary zoning, design overlay zone assessment, central city plan, and garbage and recycling rates. So we've gotten to play on all those fields and many others, and it's really been a delightful experience for me. And I'm thankful to you all. I'm thankful to the city for the opportunity to have served, and also just to have a really different look at things. My professional career with patient care and with public health, things happened in minutes or hours or days mostly, and sometimes months and years. This all happens in years and decades. So it's just a really different time perspective, which has been really fun. So all in all, it's been a really great experience, and I'm really thankful for the opportunity to have served, and I hope that I've made some positive contributions to the board. So thanks again, carry on, and I'm sure whoever is chosen as my replacement will be great.
And you have. I can't believe mitigation hierarchy.
To honor Gary and our other departing commissioner later in the meeting. So are there other items of interest from commissioners? I have a, if you want to.
I hadn't planned on it. I do appreciate this opportunity. I don't think I knew what I was getting into. But I've learned, I mean, I came in like Gary without any experience in planning, zoning, but with an interest in mixed-use development, affordability, and making the city better for our communities of color and households with low incomes. And I've learned a lot from each and every one of you, and been forced to learn quickly. And I want to appreciate all of the staff support, particularly when I come back with various requests. So I've enjoyed my time here, and I'm looking forward to supporting the next youth position that comes on board.
Thank you. I have a couple of items. First, a note that on Thursday afternoon, there's a panel at PSU talking about how California has changed its development review standards for transportation to be focused on reduction of VMT. So as an alternative to looking at level of service, they're looking at reduction of VMT. And if anybody wants the details, it's not widely publicized, but I'd be happy to pass on the information. And then you may recall that I serve as this commission's liaison to the project updating the bicycle parking zoning code. And I think it's becoming clear what some of the big issues in that project are going to be, and I just want to give you guys a preview. And if you have any brilliant policy thoughts I can bring back to the committee, let me know. Really the focus is, will we have enough bicycle parking, and will it be of high enough quality to actually get used? Because those of you who follow this know that we sort of evolved our standards, and our standards for long-term parking are still pretty loose, so we'll be looking at that. One of the issues is that back in 2010, when we changed the ratio for residential bike parking, we allowed that parking could be in the unit in the multifamily building if there was a designated area, including a hook or some physical infrastructure to show you where the bike parking was. What we've learned through this project is that that gets honored in the breach, basically, that tenants request that the hooks be removed, people don't like taking bicycles up elevators, that parking is not being effectively used. So I think we're likely to see a recommendation from the committee that not be an allowed way to accommodate bicycle parking, which means we'll need much bigger bike rooms. So I know that'll be an issue that we'll talk about. We're probably going to have two sets of ratios, one for the more intense parts of Portland and one for the lower development intensities, and there'll be a question about how we draw that map. Is it the pattern areas? Is it the mixed-use zoning types, the centers and corridors? Yeah, exactly how will we define where those tier boundaries are? A big challenge is that we're trying to make sure that buildings that are built today have the bike parking that will accommodate the bike use in 2035, but if we implemented that today, we'd have half-empty bike rooms, and that's probably not a political reality. So how we plan for that transition and make sure we're accommodating future need without wasting resources in the near term. And there are also issues with not just new development, but how we accommodate bike parking in redevelopment situations. So that's just a preview of some of the issues coming towards us before too long. Thank you. Kat, are you ready? All right. Susan, director's report.
So one thing came to mind, so I apologize for sticking this in there, but last week the Urban Land Institute had a luncheon presentation, and that's an organization that combines people that are in the public sector, but also architects, developers, owners, professional service people that serve the development community. And they were talking about the resiliency of different cities across the world, and they found that Portland ranked pretty well on that in terms of building a resilient city and being proactive in terms of how you're going to adapt to when what you didn't expect to come actually happens. And just thought it was worth throwing out there that sometimes we sort of end up with a tension between the community and the development side, but these are people that are out, proactively trying to learn about how can we be more resilient, how can we support that when we develop projects, and also how they market it. So it was a useful hour.
Thank you. Susan?
I just had one item, which is a continuation of what Gary and Maggie started, and that I thought it'd be easier for us to just have a few words from everybody now about Gary and Maggie, in case anyone needs to take off early, which I think maybe someone needs to do. And, I think both of them, this will be their last meeting, at least on this side of that table. And I do expect that we will see them on that side of the table, providing input and comments and ideas in the future. Gary, I've known Gary for a long time. I once met Gary 20-something years ago randomly on an airplane, and I sat next to this guy, and we just were chatting about New Zealand and all these other things. And later I find out that that's who Gary Oxman was, because I don't even think we ever exchanged names after it was like a 6-hour flight or something. So Gary's been on the commission since its inception and its evolution from the Planning Commission to the Planning and Sustainability Commission. You all know that he served as the health officer for Multnomah County, I think for 27, 25, a long time, many, many years. And he really brought that experience to the table, and that was what we were hoping for in broadening the Planning Commission to include health and environmental issues and jobs and some of the other issues that have definitely been a part of your discussions. I think Gary really has a deep understanding, and he's really good at integrating together public health and personal health issues and environmental issues, equity issues, and how those things kind of fit together. So I think all of us would agree that he's incredibly credible, that people think of him as someone who listens before he speaks, not like all of us. And he has a real desire to really listen fully to other people's points of view, and I just really, really appreciate that. I think he truly brings his head and his heart to his decision-making, and just want to thank him for that. So thank you very much. And Maggie, from my perspective, Maggie was sort of our experiment. She was going to be our first youth commissioner, and as such, I think we all thought, as the adults in the room, that the youth commissioner would be someone that we could sort of mentor and mold. And as, of course, you all know, she ended up being the one that mentored us and very much taught all of us, and I just really appreciate that. I think you're wise beyond your years a little bit, and you brought a depth of intense curiosity and a real acknowledgement of equity and anti-displacement policies and actions, and that it can't just be all policy, it needs to be action, and a focus on obviously affordable housing, tenant issues, and the need to take the issue of equity and merge it deeply into issues like climate change. So thank you so much for being involved and being a part of this. When I've talked about you as our youth member to others, they're always like, what do you mean? She's not a youth member. No, she can't be. And so I just really appreciate that. And I know everyone here does too. So thank you. Anyone else? And you can all think about great things to say. If you want to wait, I think we're going to have a little celebration at the end. But, thank you.
Is there anybody else? I'll quickly say a couple things. First of all, yeah, the comment on the youth commissioner, I don't know why there's such a title. Maggie, what you've done is prove that there shouldn't be a description of youth. You have so much maturity as a young woman that you shouldn't have to have a qualification, so to say, in your title of a youth commissioner, because I think you brought as much to the table as anybody many times your age. So thank you so much. Your insight. it's so impressive. I know you're going to go on to do such wonderful things for our community and in your life, and I'm so excited to get to kind of watch you continue on and see what you do. And Gary, and this is somewhat of maybe a kudos to Susan, but having the participation of health in a planning commission setting and making us really think about that, and especially in Portland where we don't necessarily have codes within our, we don't have our zoning code specifically kind of talk about air quality, this and that. What a phenomenal opportunity, and the insight that you've brought has been wonderful. And Susan's absolutely right. You've always been very thoughtful and thorough, I think, in your perspective and in your discussions and deliberations, and I've so greatly appreciated that, and you're going to be greatly missed, both of you. So high expectations for whoever comes to fill your guys' seats. high bars to reach. Any other comments? Okay. I kind of jumped in there. We have you handed off. Can I take the baton? Maybe that's what I should ask Chris. Thank you. Thank you. You're a good teammate. So next item, if there's nothing else, and I'm not seeing anybody jumping up, is a consent agenda. Consideration of the minutes for May 9th.
Move the consent agenda.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? No one opposed, so that passes. And here we are to our briefing on the Southwest Corridor Equitable Housing Strategy.
Good evening. My name is Erik Engstrom with the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. And with me is Rachel Duke and Ryan Curran. Rachel is with the Community Partners for Affordable Housing, and Ryan is with the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. We're going to be joined in a little bit by Pam from the Community Alliance of Tenants. She's, I believe, caught in the Central City transportation system somewhere on her way, and you'll be talking about that later, I guess. And we had hoped also to have Matt Scheibold from the Bureau of Housing with us, but he's out sick today, and so Ryan's going to be pinch hitting for some of his lines. The purpose today was to give you an overview of the equitable housing in the Southwest Corridor project, as well as give you an early opportunity for some inputs on the elements of the strategy and how we're formulating the housing targets. We're just getting started on that, and it's a good opportunity to have you just think about where we're at and the beginnings of that. The purpose of the project overall is to produce a strategy that will help us produce more equitable housing outcomes in tandem with a major transportation investment in the corridor. And Ryan's going to go into more details of the project scope and purpose in a few minutes, but basically it's to set targets, build community capacity, and develop a financial and organizational strategy for the corridor. Before we go into the housing strategy details, I wanted to just take a brief moment to update you on where the transit project is in the planning process. The slide up there shows the current alignment. You'll notice that it has several branches still, which means we haven't decided which line the alignment's going to go and where all the stations are going to be. The planning for high-capacity transit in this corridor has been underway for a number of years now. Metro, the Federal Transit Administration, and TriMet are the lead agencies. City of Portland is a partner in the project. This corridor is part of a regional plan that has been in existence for many decades that lays out the sequence of gradual expansion of the regional transit system. This would be for Portland, this would be the final spoke radiating out of the central city in the planned rail or high-capacity transit system. This project is now in the draft environmental impact statement phase, which means that which leads to the selection of what we call a locally preferred alternative in 2018. And that means we've narrowed it down to a specific alignment, which then can be subject to a vote in 2018 or 2020 for funding. And then there's a final EIS and further design. The current phase of planning is overseen by a steering committee of elected officials, and then there's a citizen advisory committee that advises them as well. A number of planning decisions were made earlier in the process, including removal of tunnel options to OHSU and PCC, defining Bridgeport Village as the terminus, and selecting light rail as the mode. There was, if you recall, some discussion of bus rapid transit, but ultimately the region settled on light rail as the preferred mode. During the draft environmental impact statement, we're still narrowing, and there's still some decisions to be made, including how best to serve downtown Tigard, if the line will be in Barber or beside I-5, and there's a couple variations on that. And then also determining how it will enter downtown Portland, either on Barber and 4th Avenue or on Nadeau via Lincoln. And if approved by voters and it's funded by the federal government, it would be under construction in the 2020 to 2024 timeframe. So we're still a number of years out, but now is the time to be doing the housing planning. So to shift gears now back to the housing strategy, the genesis of the housing strategy came when both from the City Council, Portland City Council, and the Metro Council earlier in the planning phases for the rail, both entities have expressed desire for a clear housing strategy to emerge before we get too much further in the transit planning. And Portland City Council in particular is expecting to see this strategy next year when they consider when they vote on the locally preferred alternative, which starts to trigger their deeper financial commitment in the project. So based on that, Portland and Tigard applied for and received a grant from Metro to do this work. Metro also simultaneously applied for and got grant money from the Federal Transit Administration to support further work and expand that into not only housing but economic development and educational connections. And that work is known as the SWEDS, or Southwest Equitable Development Strategy. So you may start to hear that acronym. The Portland Tigard housing strategy is a subset of that. It's separate from the rail project, but it's in a tight orbit. I think those circles are intended to kind of illustrate that orbit. And so we're working within that larger Metro SWEDS effort. And Rachel is here in part to talk about her experience. She's straddling both of those efforts. She's simultaneously serving on the Light Rail Citizen Advisory Committee and also within our Equitable Housing Project Committee. So she's going to talk a little bit about that role briefly.
Yes, and I also want to let folks know, do I need that? I also want to let folks know Community Partners for Affordable Housing is a small but mighty affordable housing development corporation. We serve Washington County and Southwest Portland, and our roots are in Tigard, and really our roots are along the corridor. We have 8 projects in our portfolio and 2 right now in pre-development. 5 of our 8 projects are within a quarter mile of the light rail corridor, and one of our projects that's in pre-development is in the Tigard Triangle, which is also very close to the planned corridor. So it's a place where we spend a lot of time. We know a lot about the community, and we care a lot about what happens there. So I have the opportunity also to be a voice on the Citizens Advisory Council or Commission that's advising eventually the steering committee around the locally preferred option, which is the route. And my voice there is really focused on issues around equity and remembering that we want to make sure we plan for folks who already live in the corridor. We have a lot of vulnerable communities who live along the proposed corridor who really need to not be priced out of their housing when the light rail goes in. So thinking through what are the strategies around gentrification and anti-gentrification, and how do we add more units to a community that really has a deficit of affordable housing. And when we think about the kinds of routes we want, how do we want to think about the times that the light rail is running? For example, we have a lot of shift workers or folks who maybe aren't working traditional schedules, and really thinking through what does that mean for a light rail that's going to equitably serve the whole community, since it's the whole community that's making this investment.
Good evening. I'm going to give a little bit of an overview of the scope of the equitable housing strategy. And I appreciate this time to get some guidance from you all. We'll have an open discussion at the end about some of the targets we're hoping to set and some of the strategies that we'll be exploring and proposing as part of the strategy. But note that we'll be back in front of you in probably 9 months, a little bit more, for with the draft strategy and hoping for support at that time. So there'll be a more in-depth discussion at that point. So some context. This plan is standing on the shoulders of those who come before it. There is the 2040 plan, the Portland plan, the Barber Concept plan. We also are looking at Tigard's comprehensive plan policies. One important point to note is that this is a housing strategy that looks at Portland and Tigard. They're a partner in this. Their city council and planning commission will also be looking at this strategy and supporting it. It is also wanted to note that it's not just an affordable housing strategy, though that is the thrust of it. It also is looking at the full spectrum of housing need along the corridor, which all these plans at some level address that, but just wanted to be explicit about it. The comprehensive plan, especially since it's been adopted so recently, has a number of housing, community engagement, equitable growth policies that this is one of the first attempts to operationalize. So I think it'll be interesting for you all to watch how policy is put into practice. Just to note, and we actually, for our advisory group, actually have pulled out all those policies that are kind of more explicit to the work, and happy to share that resource with you. Although I'm sure all of you have read the comprehensive plan front to back and have memorized all the equity policies. So here is our timeline. Again, we will be back in front of you before going to council. So working from right to left, the equitable housing strategy to be adopted, kind of paired with the locally preferred alternative. Council has to adopt that. It'll come with a local match. So at that point, they really want to see that we have a housing strategy that is meaningful and is hopefully has a plan for capitalization and implementation. So in order to get to that point, we're going to be working with our partners in the community and our institutional partners, and especially PHB. So Matthew Scheibold would normally be here with us. The Housing Bureau is co-leading this from the stance of the city of Portland. And like I said before, Tigard is supportive, but their capacity doesn't always lend itself to them planning, day to day with us. So we'll be setting housing targets, developing some key strategies that we'll narrow in on, including today we'll discuss some of the menu that's available, and then some recommendations on how to capitalize and how to implement. The major components of it are, if you work the top left, kind of going clockwise, are setting targets. We've seen those in other predominantly URA plans. We will do that again, likely looking at percentages and growth over a certain period of time, and preservation and new construction. We'll be looking at financing sources, so existing and new, hopefully growing the pie. Development tools that look at land, but also the permanent capital and construction. And then what are some, the supportive land use policies, both in Portland and Tigard, that can support equitable TOD. So I think that's kind of the heart of the plan, if I were to characterize it. The bottom components are organizational capacity support. So SEPA is in the corridor. Home Forward has a presence in the corridor, but and we'll show you some data later that shows there is not a lot of affordable housing in the corridor, and so not a lot of nonprofits or for-profits aren't producing, except for maybe in the barbells of South Downtown and Tigard. So who is going to enter into that corridor and take advantage of those opportunities? And how do we support them as whether it's a consortium or some kind of compact, equitable TOD compact, where folks are really committed to each other and to the collective goals of this strategy. So that's one piece. And then everyone's hair is kind of on fire about opportunity sites, getting ahead of market speculation and plans for the station areas. So there are a very small number of public sites. Those are opportunities. There will be many more. And so we're hoping to have a plan that we can put forth to the councils to prioritize some early sites. So those are the four components of the plan. A big piece of it is our community partnerships. This advisory group is the core of that. meeting tomorrow for the first time. If I were to characterize this group, it would be that there's probably two groups they fall into. There's the real estate and finance folks, and then there's the policy and advocacy folks, and a few that do both. So we'll note that. And I wanted to give a chance for Rachel, and if Pam, if she swoops in here, she'll also speak to the opportunity that this advisory group brings.
I think for Community Partners for Affordable Housing, it's important to say that we work, up to Tigard. We have a little bit going on in Hillsborough and in Beaverton as well. But we're super excited to have the opportunity to look at this as more of a region, because really we see it as a region. And I will say that I've been at SEPA, I've been the ED there for about 1.5 years, and before that I worked at Home Forward for a very long time. And I see folks who are homeless in Portland that I know from my work in Portland in Tigard all the time. It's a very permeable region, and people aren't staying like in their little place because that's where we think they're from. So to have a regional strategy around housing and transportation makes a lot of sense. And so I'm excited because it's an opportunity for 2 different cities that we work with, and the 2 counties, Washington County and Multnomah County, to work together. And in my heart, I hope there's a little bit of bringing Washington County along, because there's a lot of work that needs to be done there, which I'm learning about every day. I can't speak to the demographics of the whole region, but I can tell you that many of our family properties along this corridor are very, very diverse. About 50% of the folks who live there are people of communities of color, and many, many folks who are immigrants or refugees. And so we know that there's a lot of folks who live along the corridor who really, really need affordable housing and really depend on that. And so I think that Pam had some additional information to bring about that, but she's not here, so I'm just going to share that. And I have some other anecdotes I can share later when it's my turn, which is soon. Actually, I think it's now. Yeah. Great. So, sorry. So, I mean, one of the things that we've talked about already is the kind of the idea of funding for new housing. But I just want to point out there's a lot of unregulated or naturally occurring affordable housing right now along the corridor. And that is really, really important for us to be thinking about how to preserve that so folks aren't forced to move. In some cases, there may be displacement that's not economic. That might be a result primarily of the light rail going through. And in those cases, for sure, we need to be very thoughtful about how we relocate communities. And we need to be really thinking about creating enough choice around different, we definitely need to have housing for all incomes along the light rail corridor, and the market's going to take care of quite a bit. The market is not going to take care of poor people. That generally is not how it works in our community, and so it's really important that planners and folks who have that mission step in and really make that happen. I want to let people know that last year, in the fall, there was a community in Tigard that was very similar to a lot of the communities that you hear about in Portland, where somebody comes in, they buy the property, and then everyone is forced to leave. So that happens in Washington County, too. There was recently a community in Tigard called the Walnut Creek Apartments. It was in October. Everyone had to leave. A lot of Latino families, a lot of kids in school who were completely disrupted. There's all these other social issues that happen when kids can't finish the year out in school. We know that for every time a kid moves, for every 3 times a kid moves during a school year, it's like losing a year of school. So there's all these other reasons, besides it being the right thing to do, to find ways to preserve this housing. And there are a lot of very vulnerable communities along the corridor.
So funding, displacement, equitable housing choice, I mean, those are some of the issues we'll be addressing through the strategy, as well as the placemaking and the connection to transit in some of those key nodes that the Barber Concept Plan kind of laid out as priorities, as well as the Tigard Triangle for Tigard. And the piece around engaging low-income tenants and communities of color comes straight out of the comp plan, and just want to reiterate that that is a racial equity component to this strategy is driving not just the process, but the product. So we do have some grants, some community grants that have been released, and some of our nonprofit partners are putting together applications to do some direct tenant engagement and organizing along the corridor, and haven't yet identified the specific buildings or focus areas or populations, but that's a work in progress. And that information, though qualitative, will be paired with our quantitative analysis to really define and refine our strategies. So just wanted to flag that as a product that will be forthcoming that I think will be central to the strategy. I wanted to pause there and ask if there's any questions about the scope of the project, how it relates to the other planning going on in the corridor, and if there are any other major issues that folks wanted to either expand upon this list or if there's any omissions. Just to have a facilitate maybe 5-10 minute conversation about that.
So it looks like Eli and then Mike and then Katie.
I just want to share a couple perspectives. I was on the Metro group that set up the defining the equitable planning grant program, and let people know this is it was on the first review committee for selecting projects. This was the first round they funded any projects, and this round, this is the only project with 2 different jurisdictions teaming up to go after applications. Actually, 2 different separate applications. So it's kind of an innovative experiment, and I'm really hopeful that when it comes time to make zoning reform changes and financial commitments, both sides of the jurisdictional line do it, because that could set for a model which doesn't happen very often. And I know, Rachel, from a lot of times Portland has put resources in and made changes to support our lowest income residents, and jurisdictions outside of Portland haven't always done that. So this is an encouraging sign that Tigard says that they will. And other jurisdictions got these grants also making similar commitments. So I guess I'll just leave it at that. But I guess one little question is, are there any hooks on these funding sources? I know there's not with Metro, that jurisdictions actually follow through and implement the, do they lose anything if they don't actually update their zoning or make financial commitments to provide the housing that they promised in their grant applications? That would go to Portland as well, I guess.
Typically with the Metro grants, the hook is you do have to bring something to your city council to adopt. Most of the grants are to varying degrees loose about what that is, because usually you have to work that out during the project. But in this case, I think the deliverable is bringing a housing strategy that, as Ryan said, spells out how we would like to capitalize the funds necessary to build the housing that we've set goals for. And I think that is a regional strategy, so it hopefully will include commitments from multiple partners. And we haven't reached a conclusion yet, but we're talking about what is the right way to write that down. Is it a multi-entity compact that different? It's not exactly intergovernmental agreement because there's other non-governmental partners too, but it's some kind of compact.
Mike, Katie, and then I think Andre.
Yeah, I think I asked this question a while back, and I don't remember what the response was. Going way back to a similar process with Interstate Light Rail, when the Coalition for a Livable Future was actually active in pushing policy, we managed to get through a racial impact statement. And I honestly don't know what the end result of that was, and I'm curious whether you're familiar with that. Did that prove to be a useful tool at all to address displacement or not? And is it something you're looking at in this process?
I can speak to it. I am not aware of that statement or that tool or its impact. I will note that our emphasis on the organizational capacity building that we hope to have is a lesson learned from past housing strategies, that supporting those who are going to be there after the strategy is adopted to have a long-term lasting commitment to that geographic area is a best practice, and we want to support that. And then for the recommendations within the strategy to maintain a focus on equity, and specifically racial equity, we are applying an equity lens to, like, a set of questions that center those most impacted and look at explicit disparities, so that it'll be a criteria that we weight the different funding sources and tools. So along the way, our advisory group, a subset of them will be applying that lens to the recommendations. So we hope that's a practice that it bears fruit and kind of keeps us focused. In terms of an outcome, like a statement of a commitment to those disparities, or reducing those disparities, I could see that language folding into a compact. I think that would be one place for it. But in terms of accountability, a lot of this is self-imposed accountability, right? And so we are stepping out together with Tigard, which is helpful. You're not alone, but we're stepping out together to make a commitment to an equitable growth, knowing full well what the default is if when major transit investments occur, create increased desirability, increased land values, so it makes challenges for affordability, and so we want to get ahead of that. Did you comment on that?
But just that the partners working together, many of them who've been involved so far, like we right now have a special project with Unite Oregon where we're doing some organizing among our tenants because they bring a special expertise about working with communities of color and refugee communities. And so I think that there's a general understanding that we have a very diverse community along the light rail corridor right now, even though people don't really necessarily believe that. Like, you wouldn't know, no one thinks, oh, Washington County, so diverse, but it is. And our goal is to really be serving those populations, and so.
Did you say Unite Oregon?
Mhm.
Okay. For some reason I thought you said Unite Way.
Oh, yeah, no, that'd be nice, but yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, this is very interesting to me, and actually, I've thought a lot about displacement because I'm from East Portland. I live in East Portland, and so a lot of things are happening sort of more generally there that will be happening for you guys along that corridor, and I'm really interested in how effective can you be in terms of really supporting those groups, because when I was going through your this little brochure, you said that now we need to think about ways to ensure housing options are available to everyone. We have lessons from housing strategies along Interstate Avenue in the northeast quadrant of the central city and examples from other cities. And I was not involved in the interstate work, but I drive through, everyone drives through there and goes, oh my God, this has changed so much. And there's a lot of talk about how much displacement there was there. So are you looking at those lessons as lessons learned, or this is what we want to do, So that's one thing that I would kind of like to know. And then I'm going to be really interested in what you're using as measures. Like, how are you going to measure success? And part of that is like, what's your map going to be? What are you going to consider as the area that you're considering? And then what are you going to track in terms of the changes? Because if you don't have those measures, you might have some really cute, neat, wonderful projects, but overall, it's not really there. So I'm really going to be following this because I would really love to see a similar kind of effort happening in East Portland.
To your question about the measures, I think we're going to segue into some of the data we have in a minute, and that relates, and also some of the targets we're setting. We'll get to that. In terms of lessons learned, part of what we're doing is modeling this effort off of what I think is a relatively successful effort in Minneapolis with, coincidentally, their Southwest Light Rail corridor, as well as some experience they've had in some other corridors, and looking back at interstate. And one of the lessons, I think, has been, as Ryan alluded to, that we had some good policies in that effort in terms of anti-displacement and equity, but one of the issues may be that there wasn't an owner of those policies where that was their primary mission. Like the TriMet clearly had the mission to build the light rail, and different entities had their missions, but there wasn't an overall sort of entity, agency, or umbrella entity that had the accountability to deliver on the housing targets. And so, that's one thing we're trying to do is create clear assignments and organizational capacity. I want to diverge, though, from this a little bit, and since Pam is here, just to give you an opportunity to say a few things. I already told them you were stuck in traffic.
I made a wrong turn. That Morrison Bridge gets you. Good afternoon. Thanks for having me. You may know me in another life, but right now I work as the policy and organizing director for the Community Alliance of Tenants. We're really excited to be a part of this new Southwest Corridor project that both Erik and Ryan have asked us to participate. And I think it's actually through some of the anti-displacement PDX work that CAP participated in and that you may have seen me in. I think we're really excited to actually put some of the values to work and actually implement some of them. So, and we're appreciative of the energy and work that you put into helping us think that through. So really quickly, I think what we wanted to share about the Community Alliance of Tenants, if folks aren't, do you want me to just jump right into the hotlines? Okay, so full context is that the Community Alliance of Tenants is the only tenant-led statewide organization. We started in 1996 in really small, humble beginnings, and we're still in that phase, but we're at this point about 2,000 tenant members statewide. We have a tenant organizer in Southern Oregon and Southern Oregon Coast, and then we also are developing tenants in Monmouth, Eugene, Salem, as well as the Portland region. And we have done some work along the Southwest Corridor, particularly in Washington County, and have great relationships with organizations as well as tenants along that area. Most recently, our most recent experience is in Tigard, supporting a building of about 112 units that was fully evicted all at once last summer. And so at this point, most of those residents have been displaced completely. I'm still in touch with a number of residents, one namely who is currently living in an RV, still looking for housing. So, and there's a whole spectrum of different experiences from those 112 units that we could share with you about where folks are at. Some are still embroiled in legal battles with that particular landlord. So, so what we do is we work directly with tenants to exercise their rights and responsibilities as tenants. As all states do, they have a particular landlord-tenant code, a set of policies and laws that they abide by to manage their contracts. And so what we do is we educate both tenants and landlords around those rights and ensure that tenants do have recourse when they're trying to exercise those rights. So we do we run a hotline so folks can call in and ask for support and advice and even receive referrals for legal support. And then also we provide resources through the City of Portland and our contractual relationship we have with the Housing Bureau to provide a lot of those resources to Portland residents. And so in that, we also provide tenant rights trainings as needed or scheduled by different agencies. We're currently working with Multnomah County on a large contract there. And then also we provide letter writing clinics. So oftentimes a landlord, regardless of their size, whether or not they're large and corporate or small, owning just a couple of units, sometimes they're not aware of their rights and responsibilities, Oregon statute, and oftentimes a really firm letter from the tenant saying, hey, I know my rights and here's the particular Oregon statute that we're talking about. Oftentimes the landlord will go, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize. And so oftentimes it reduces the amount of things that might get adjudicated when folks just know how to exercise their rights. So that's generally what we do. And but I think increasingly what we're seeing is the displacement pressures across the region. We're seeing more and more of these full eviction type buildings where an eviction will, no cause eviction will be issued to every single person in a complex. The most recent one that we've been organizing with is in North Portland and St. John's. And then other communities, for instance, Living Cully is working with another group of tenants where 20 units weren't evicted, but rather their rent was raised more than 100%. And so, of course, folks can't bear that expense, and so they're therefore essentially evicted because of the cost and their lack of ability to pay. And so we're seeing this increasingly. The more and more that we see it. We see a lot of displacement markers in terms of the change in a particular neighborhood and the development there. And so we're excited to participate in the Southwest Corridor to get ahead of that conversation of what are the displacement pressures and how can community members working together, whether they be tenant-oriented, culturally oriented, whatever affinity group they might have, come together to look at different solutions for maintaining and staying in place. Just to give you a sense of what's going on, I pulled some data from our hotline from the zip codes that include Portland and Washington County along the corridor. And in 2016, we received about 113 calls specifically from the corridor, and with complaining or reporting at least 198 different issues. And a majority of those issues were actually focused on evictions. So about a quarter of those calls were evictions. And then the rest were around habitability issues, around bed bugs, environmental health issues like mold, and other types of general maintenance and repairs. And so that was a majority of the types of calls that were coming along the corridor. And there were some other things as well. So just to give you a picture of what we do and then also what's going on in the corridor. Thank you. Yeah.
All right, we're going to give you a little taste of some of the initial housing data that we're collecting for our housing needs analysis in order to set targets.
And we're going to rush through this because we want to get through to the discussion part pretty quickly. So this will be in the PowerPoint if you want to ask us follow-up questions about it. But basically, to ground you in the comp plan, this is the characterization of the current housing supply in the corridor. I would note that about a quarter of them, the units that are in high-rises are mostly in South Waterfront and the south end of downtown. So, you know, a quarter of the housing units in the whole corridor are immediately around where we're sitting, just at the very north end of the corridor, sorry, not the south. This is the 25-35 projection of what that housing stock looks like in the corridor. We also broke that down by station, so we have slides here that show by the proposed stations what the current housing stock is by type, and then to the 2035. I would note two things here. One is that the high-rise opportunities for the most part are in the immediate north end of the corridor near downtown. The bars that are the highest, the areas with the highest housing potential are the area just south of downtown at the Gibbs station, because that's abutting South Waterfront, and in the South Portland neighborhood where there's a bit higher density zoning already. And then at to the right is the Barber Transit Center stations, and those being a town center have a higher housing capacity as well. Right. This is the population growth looking backward over the last few decades. And one thing to note here is that although Southwest is not known as a community of color, it has that portion of the community has grown faster than the other parts of the community. So it's increasingly getting more diverse. Next slide. In particular, keep going, just zip through these. In particular, there is a pretty solid and robust Latino community in Tigard, especially Central Tigard, and that's where this line would go. And then in Portland, south of the Barber Transit Center, as you go up towards PCC, there's a pocket of a Somali community, immigrant community in Portland. And so that really shows up in this data. And that's going to be one of our focus areas in terms of looking at housing preservation in that community.
This next slide shows where at least 51% of residents are low or moderate income. So those green census tracts are areas where we're going to be looking more deeply at the housing stock there, and is it vulnerable to some of the displacement pressures, and is that a focus area for preservation strategies? Sure.
So the green is at least 51%, and the red is I-5?
Yes. Yeah. And
Do you have the proposed transit line? I mean, is the proposed line in there?
There's several different options for alignment. So we just did a general purple corridor there to capture the general geography.
This is overwhelming to look at, but it is the PHB investments over the last year in Southwest. Because there's not an urban renewal area, you'll notice that there's not a lot of dollars spent in the corridor versus citywide. That's the takeaway. Here is the current portfolio, the current stock of subsidized affordable housing in the corridor is about 775 units. Little over half are in Tigard, and those in Portland are mostly is carried by Stevens Crossing, I believe, the 122. So there is not a large stock of subsidized, rent restricted, income qualified affordable housing, nor is there a high use of vouchers. This is HUD Housing Choice vouchers. So these are transferable. You can use them anywhere within these counties. Just a little over 500 are used, and that accounts for 1.3% of total renters, so a pretty low number.
Lack of utilization sometimes means there's no housing. Sometimes it means the voucher's not worth enough to get the housing that's there.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes these people are not looking there for housing. Any idea what categories that those fall in, why they're not getting much?
We have not done any follow-up, and it wasn't until very recently, I believe, that you couldn't discriminate by use of vouchers as well. So that's a recent phenomenon. You want to comment on that?
Just in our experience, when we also do housing choice voucher workshops so that folks can understand how to use their voucher and where it's good, not even just the Section 8 vouchers, but others as well, other programs that are available. And what we're noticing and finding, and this is very anecdotal, is that most of the vouchers go to 97230, which is the Portland-Gresham border. And it's hugely to do with kind of affinity. Folks are going there because they know it. That's where housing is available, that they know they can afford and that their voucher will pay for. But unfortunately, that's just, we just see an accumulation and we don't know why.
The next two slides are from a body of research that should be coming out in September from PSU is under contract to look at this naturally occurring affordable housing. So predominantly looking at some of that older stock of market housing that is affordable currently. This is the inventory as of 2016. This is a CoStar rating. So 2-star is, that kind of lower quality 1960s, 70s, 80s apartments that haven't had a lot of rehabilitation. 3-star, a little higher level, and then 4 and 5 is usually newer construction in the last 5-10 years. So a lot of buildings are in that 2-star categorization, but a lot of the units are not, and that is because those are usually smaller apartment buildings, 11 to 20 to 25 units. And what we're seeing is an uptick in sales of those 2-star properties. And they are predominantly, if we look at the map, they're predominantly in the northern part of the corridor, but kind of starting to trickle down. We'll be especially looking at those areas further down where some of the communities of color are living, and making sure that those buildings aren't vulnerable to displacement pressures. So we noted that we are going to set targets, and that this has been done before, and wanted to give 2 quick examples of one corridor between Minneapolis and St. Paul that set 10-year targets that were not only new construction but preservation, and it incorporated 2 different downtown cores. So they had a pretty aggressive goal that had then a stretch goal if they could include or if they could attract more funding. They've now surpassed that goal. And have attracted some foundation funding. Some of the tax credit pipeline was prioritized toward the corridor. So there was this momentum created through this process that resulted in new money as well as prioritization of existing funds. That was the total unit. And then more recently, their Southwest corridor, which in many ways, not just in name, looks similar in market and demographics as our Southwest corridor. And this was the first planning effort that took advantage of the new starts funding criteria that gives you extra points for an affordable housing inventory and a plan. So they set a preservation target and did a very similar study to the one we're doing on naturally occurring affordable housing, and then also set new construction and then as well home ownership goals. And so these all ended up in their New Starts application, and they have been quite successful. So wanted to take a minute to have a conversation about the type of targets that we're starting to orient toward, and then have a conversation about strategy.
So the question really is this is our preliminary list of ways you could break down the targets, and there are other ways, but we wanted to get a sense of if there are other thoughts you've had about different ways you might set targets, or if you would prioritize any of these in particular, or if you have a thought about one of these ways.
Gary, and then Chris, and then Maggie, and then Andre.
Yeah, I'm wondering how applicable the experience in Minneapolis-St. Paul is. I'm from that area originally, and it's a very different land use environment there in terms of the degree of restriction of sprawl. And so I don't think housing has accelerated in that area anywhere near like it has in the Portland metro area. So I'm just wondering how applicable that experience is in terms of, in particular, maintaining the value and maintaining existing housing stock at affordable prices.
Trying to isolate your question. You're predominantly talking about the preservation component of their strategy. So that is what they led with. Their inventory of naturally occurring affordable housing showed 6,700 units that were affordable at 60% AMI and below, and that those were trading pretty rapidly. They had an interesting prediction that didn't come true, that the rehabilitation, the price point of rehabilitation of those units would deter their demolition and rebuild, that they would be more likely to just get rehabbed. And then they started to see that wasn't occurring, that those were being demolished and then reconstructed. And so the estate agency put together a new fund, a new acquisition and preservation fund that put deed restrictions on those properties, and that it was deployed this year. So I think their ability to raise funds, they have a lot more Fortune 500 companies who have foundations, and they definitely capitalize that fund or help to. And so that's a distinction. But their affordable housing community functions very similar to our affordable housing community. They're predominantly dependent on tax credits. They wanted to get ahead of some of the speculation and acquisition that was occurring, so they have been successful. And in terms of land use, I think there was 6 different cities on that corridor versus I think we have 3. And yes, their land uses, the city's land use policies were very different. And so what Minneapolis, I am very grateful that Tigard is a partner in this work and getting ahead of it. That Tigard is a partner in our work. I think Minneapolis, the suburbs of Minneapolis, didn't step forward as much as the central cities were, and actually think there's actually a lawsuit about it right now. So there are differences for sure. But the affordable housing community comparison, I think, is a valid one.
So I look at that slide, and I'd say all of the above, please. Not really sure how to tell you how to prioritize among that because we need all the pieces. And I guess my question is more about resources. We had a robust discussion around the division corridor, and the question of whether we should think about calibrating housing investment as a fraction of the transit investment, so that we balance the impact and the resources available to mitigate that impact. What is the picture for attracting resources to this need, and is it just a question of allocating pots of money that are already available to the city, or are we actually going to be able to bring incremental resources to bear with the incremental needs that will be generated with the transit project?
I think we're looking at it as an opportunity to try and think through how to increase the funding, because we learned during the comp plan process that we really didn't have enough existing resources to meet the identified need. And this being a regional transit project, it's an opportunity to broaden the conversation, as was said earlier, into Washington County and to Tigard and other partners, and to bring Metro along with that and TriMet along with that. The existing resources, for example, the housing bond and our small amount of CET funds that we now have, that has to be spread around the city equitably, and it's not all going to end up, we can't just all allocate it all to Southwest. So this really has to bring in new resources and regional resources. Sorry, what was the other, there was another part of your question and I lost it.
Well, it was basically that. Are you going to be able to bring incremental resources to bear, or will we
right.
just be moving around the pots of money the city already has?
Well, the other thing you said that I wanted to respond to was that is there going to be enough to mitigate? I think we're looking at this as beyond mitigation. This is an opportunity to broaden housing accessibility in Southwest Portland and diversify housing choice. So we're looking at, one way to look at this is what's the overall city need of affordable housing, and what is the element of that should be in Southwest and accessible to transit. There's other ways of looking at it, like what's the low income job base in the corridor, and what does that imply about the need for housing that's nearby. There's also looking at it from more of a buildable lands inventory perspective of how many housing units do we expect. It's probably around 9,000 new housing units by 2035 that we expect in this corridor in the Portland portion. So what does that say about how many of those ought to be affordable if we're looking at the citywide income distribution? So there's a couple lenses we're going to apply to this, and it'll be probably a triangulation, because we may have 3, 4, 5 different methods of arriving at a target, and then the target we pick will be in that constellation somewhere. Yeah, so we wanted to also ask about,
Yeah, I think we had Maggie and then Andre.
okay.
Yeah, I would just echo all of the above. Plus, if we're talking, we're not only talking about, allowing households with low incomes to stay in place, but we also want to see a demographic and racial preservation of the area too. So I want to continually tease out, like, are we seeing displacement based on income? Is that disproportionately people of color? So to add that in there about not
And
displacing.
Specifically, I think in Portland, what I would translate that to is, are we successful in not seeing the displacement of the immigrant communities in the Southwest that are unique to that corridor?
I would say 60%. That's our comp plan. So that's a done deal, at least from my perspective. The other issue is this is about development. So as you triangulate the development, and this is what the problem was on Interstate, is you get development outpacing housing. So the developers run in and build faster than the housing folks can get there. And so guidance on targets is great. The 10-year time frame is great, but how do you manage it within that time frame so that development, you don't get the interstate, development's all there, and you're trying to shoehorn in housing behind it. And the housing's very expensive at that point. South Waterfront, and so how do we manage development? And that gets to a concern, which I'll get to later, but about the finances being separate from this, because the finances, as Chris indicated, we've had the discussion of tying housing and financials of the building of the train together. And without that connection, the train's built, development occurs, and housing's truly, it's not even a caboose, it's left.
I think that's why we're comfortable putting in the strategy some early opportunity sites in advance of even knowing the capitalization plan or who the implementing partners would be. Tying down some sites is going to be key, because if this is a 10-year plan, we can't come in 2027 and say, let's get to work. It's not a year 9 plan. It needs to be, work is already being done in parallel to this strategy development. So, folks, for a good example is City of Tigard is doing pre-development work on 3 different sites with their CET grant. So, we have some, like I keep saying, we have pre-development envy. Like we would like to be in that state where we're working on sites, doing some pre-development on affordable housing. We're not there yet. PHB, if they were here, they would speak to their interest and willingness to do the same, and especially as they are working with their advisory group for the bond. Those policies will be set, established relatively soon, and so hopefully there'll be some encouragement to go and do that early. Are you speaking to kind of getting ahead of that speculation?
Yeah, I mean, the streetcar put out a great study that said, probably you're going to get 9 to 35% bump in the values of these properties, and you're going to get. We've seen developers get ahead as soon as they get to the advanced design. Developers start buying because they know it's pretty real at that point, and that the city of Portland get ahead of that in purchasing and securing property. TriMet, I'm sure, is once there's a preferred alternative, is going to be purchasing property for the development of the rail line, and there's always excess. Maybe the housing should get with them before that and buy up some of that property and lease it back to the TriMet. When they're done, the remainder goes. But somehow, prior to advanced design, the housing is secured in leased properties, and preservation too, because there will be pressure on the affordable housing that is out there as soon as owners know that there's going to be development, they can raise the rents.
And I think that's especially important. That's partly our thought in working with Pam and what she described in terms of the community intelligence on the ground about what's happening in these buildings. I think it's our hope that we can actually succeed in intercepting some of that and direct resources so that we have the ability to bring the Housing Bureau in and secure if a building is threatened. I doubt that we'd be able to do that in every situation. There just aren't those resources. But if we can connect the dots there on some projects, that would be good.
Is it directly pertinent, or could we wait for them to finish and then kind of do our last round? Okay. Why don't we if you could finish up?
Sure.
Because I think you had one last slide, maybe, if I remember right.
We just have a early menu of strategies that we're exploring, and we'll some of these will lightly get touched on, and others we're going to bring on consultants to really flesh out the business case for a few of these and proposals. But I wanted to open it up for a discussion of some of these, and then also ask Pam and Rachel to speak to their organization's priorities around early action.
I'd say to the extent we run out of time, we'll leave you with this PowerPoint, obviously, if anyone has thoughts about any particular strategy element that you think is really important, or something that's not on this menu, please follow up with an email.
So if you guys had additional points you'd like to add, why don't you go ahead and do that, and then we'll go around with the commissioners.
Sure. So what I briefly described, and I can describe in a little bit more detail, is our Safe Housing Project, which is something that was born out of a project that we partnered with Bureau of Planning and Sustainability to do in 2012, which is to take a look at some of the questions around habitability in individual apartments. And so usually what we do is we have the hotline kind of give us a tip, right, of which neighborhoods or which buildings to go to. And so if we're going to be expressly looking at the Southwest Corridor, it would be opening up our hotline and promoting it along the corridor to make sure that residents are aware that they have a resource available to them to find out about how to exercise their rights and learn more about resources. And so in that way, we have this tip line that allows us to then make some decisions about which types of naturally occurring affordable housing that we can engage in and do this kind of community building and organizing in, learning from residents themselves what types of habitability issues are of their concern, whether or not repairs are happening as needed. Oftentimes folks, and this is the current situation because we live in Oregon is a no-cause eviction state, so it allows for landlords don't necessarily have to give a reason for why they're asking someone to leave, which kind of creates kind of this strange catch-22 where essentially residents and tenants don't call in very common repairs to a property because they know that if they call too many times, and this is the main complaint we get on the hotline, is that they will be no-cause evicted after 2 calls or even 1 call. So speaking up about your rights actually gets you evicted in the state right now, and so that's something that we're handling at the state in current legislation, but we see that it plays out as a displacement pressure, and so our interest at CAT is to actually provide the ability to build relationships with tenants along the corridor to ensure that can we root out those issues and what types of buildings. Whether they be recently, so a lot of the buildings that we see that are getting mass evicted or seeing really intense or extreme rent increases are often because owners recently changed hands. And so, there's a new lien on the property, and so essentially, folks, the profit motive is very clear, and so we look at indicators like that to choose some of the buildings. But our interest is to be able to provide the resources and kind of create a sense of community building so that tenants have a sense of recourse, so that they have options to stay. So that's through our safe housing program. That's what we try to do, is provide those resources at the same time as giving tenants an opportunity to understand their rights and how to exercise them.
Speaking as an organization that spends a lot of time in Washington County, I think that the land acquisition and the development of a regional fund and the kind of joint development of key sites is going to be really, really important in terms of bringing the region along. Washington County has not historically provided the same kind of resources for housing development that Multnomah County or the city of Portland has. So from our perspective as kind of a part of the community housing advocacy group in Washington County, we know that we're all trying to figure out how to get more units on the ground. So as part of that this bringing those resources in is important, and preserving the communities that exist is going to be really important.
Thank you. So Michelle, and then Eli, did you have?
Yeah.
Okay.
This one. So if the light rail gets federal funding, can you, and the environmental impact statement says that loss of housing is an impact, can you include any money for mitigation housing in the amount you're asking for? Or can you use any of the land the city has banked for affordable housing as a local share?
Additionally, if it's property that's being directly impacted, as in, tearing down a complex because that's physically where the rail is going, that has been how it's been handled usually. The grayer area is how far you go with indirect displacement. It's more economic displacement, and but if it's direct displacement because of the physical rail, then typically that is part of that, and we can count that.
Eli, and then Andre.
Go back 1 slide, please. I had a comment on this one. I just want to suggest adding to the list duration of affordability, whether it be rental or ownership, because that light rail line is going to be there a long time, 100 years. There should be affordable housing that long too. And I know Portland's programs fairly well in this regard, and could kind of nudge them on the homeownership side to get some more land trust. I don't know in other jurisdictions what the requirements are for affordability, but not every jurisdiction requires 60 years of affordability or has a 99-year affordable option for homeownership. And Portland could do better on some of those fronts and could model that with other jurisdictions. So it'd be great to include in the reporting the duration of affordability.
In the interest of time, I'll send you a lot of comments, but what I don't see is when you look at Metro's website for the project, it has no mention of housing. And we're sitting here talking about housing on a light rail line, and Metro has $800,000 for housing and doing all their stuff, but they don't even, for the project site, which is the official project site, no mention of housing. So I'm concerned that we're not merging the two and they're bifurcated and we end up with, kind of the disaster.
There is a tab on their website that's waiting to be populated for the equitable strategy. They just got the grant, so they haven't put it up yet. But I know they're working on that. I know they're working on that website change.
Well, it seems to me if it's a joint strategy, it ought to be up there at the same time. If it's not, if it's a separate strategy and it's, kind of behind the thing. The other part is there's a bond measure to come and pay for part of this. How does the bond measure inform and finance housing? The other thing is inclusionary housing seems to me to be a base, but what can we do in Portland? I don't know about Tigard, but what can we do in Portland to look at additional housing bonuses for affordable housing? Because when you looked at your map, it was kind of bookends. There was really nothing in the center for excessive. And could we do more around zoning to give more affordable housing bonuses above the inclusionary zoning? And then how does inclusionary zoning work? The targets, as someone mentioned, are very important. The targets must be set at a stretch, and I would argue that the corridor in itself is, the targets are in isolation, not as a city scope. Because if you look at the city, we're only going to do, I think the goal is 10,000 units. I could argue you could do 5,000 here. That leaves the rest of the city kind of downtown could take up 5,000. No one else has really any target in the goal. So it should be looked at, in my view, isolation because it's a development opportunity around transit. The last one I will talk about is the early funding. When you come back in 18, the strategy should be under implementation, spending of money, because soon after that, the bond measure's coming and the horse will kind of, so to speak, out of the barn. So early funding is critical. And are you taking this to council?
Yeah, this will be presented to both city councils, Tigard and Portland, at some point.
I just want to add that zoning, some of the zoning issues are part of the planning for the equitable housing grant in Tigard, and actually, I don't know as much about, the Portland zoning is probably in better shape, but they are looking at zoning, understanding that a lot of their zoning regulations are barriers.
And the last thing is, in the comp plan, there are 11 housing strategies, includes a racial impact statement, so around development. And so I would encourage you to look at the comp plan and look at those strategies so we can make sure that the first big project uses them.
So I kind of set myself a stretch goal here at 6:30, but we have Jeff wants to make a comment, Mike wants to make a comment. If you feel, please make your comments. I don't want to cut you off, but if you feel they can also be followed up more extensively in writing, that'd be great for us to think about.
I can follow up with answers in writing, so I don't have to spend time
That'd be
responding.
great. That'd be great. Okay, so Jeff and then Mike.
I'll go ahead and pass.
Okay.
Yeah, my question is really stupid, so I'll follow up in writing.
Well, now I'm curious.
Expose my stupidity to everyone.
Anybody else?
Windfall
I have a
tax.
question. You can answer later.
Okay.
Very quick. Will this end up being a zoning code update coming back to our group?
Just quickly on that one, no, this project is not a code project unless we find a specific thing that really needs to be changed. But the intent is it's really leading to the question of how do we capitalize the funding we need to meet the goals we're setting. And so it's not a zoning code thing, but we will be asking you to send a letter of support to the report, a recommendation on it. It won't be a land use decision, but we want your recommendation.
And I have, if nobody else has anything, I have just one quick point in that it's, and I kind of just want to say this purposely out loud because it's a counterpoint to Andre's comment on the targets about being all at 60%. And while I don't disagree that 60% needs to be the focus and the target and the, we got to put the energy into it. I think making sure we have targets for understanding, I think total housing production and certainly 80% as well, also helps in the discussion of understanding how to get 60%. I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Mike. I hadn't said a word. My Lord. Okay.
After she shuts us down.
I just thought it was only fair since I was giving a counterpart to Andre. But thanks for running the meeting for me, Mike. Appreciate it. Anything else? No? Okay, with that,
Thank you.
Move on to the next one. So next is, hopefully, our final work session and our recommendation on the Central City 2035 plan.
Good evening, everyone. As Kat said, Sally Edmonds, Planning and Sustainability. As Kat said, this is our 9th work session and hopefully our vote on Central City 2035. We have a couple of agenda items for you tonight before we get to the vote. As you saw in your packet, we have a piece about floating platforms, the North Pearl setback, Interstate 5, and then there's Commissioner Talmadge would like to speak about the Green Loop, and then we'll move on to the vote unless there are other amendments.
Perfect.
Okay? So let's get started. Mindy, with floating platforms.
Hello, Mindy Brooks, Planning and Sustainability. And we are looking at Table M. If you want to pull that out and have it in front of you. So this discussion was started in April. And the updated memo that you have in front of you includes the code commentary. And the commentary describes the legislative intent of the zoning code. So it basically serves as a purpose statement for the zoning code. There were a few questions that were raised at the last work session, and I wanted to address those. And then Eli entered a amendment that we can discuss after we answer a few of the questions from last time. So this is a map of the open space in the central city, and this is where the standard would apply. One of the concerns that was raised about flatting platforms is that they should be for recreation only, that there should be no hot dog stands on the floating platforms. The open space zone is for recreation only. Many uses like residential are not allowed in an open space zone. There is some limited commercial that is allowed in the open space zone, but no commercial would be allowed on the floating platforms because in the River General Overlay Zone, we require that all uses that are not river dependent and river related must be set back at least 50 feet from the top of bank. So you would not be able to do commercial uses within the river itself on a floating platform unless if you obtain a Greenway Goal exception. Another question was who can install the platforms? Can anyone just put them in? The answer is no, you can't. Zoning Code 33236.050A says, the owner of the floating structure must own or lease enough of the upland lot to meet all of the applicable regulations. The open space in the central city, as you can see from this map, is primarily in public ownership. There is a little bit that is owned by OMSI, so essentially this standard could be used by the City of Portland or by OMSI. And those were the main questions that came up last time. So I'll stop there, and Eli, if you'd like to, unless if there are general questions before we go into that.
So I do have a general question. So you asserted that the commentary serves as a purpose statement.
Yeah.
Tell me how that works in practice. Would somebody down at the permit counter, if they had a question, actually go find the commentary and refer to that, making a permit decision?
The standard is intended to be non-discretionary, and so it should be clear and objective. Someone should walk in and you should be able to do a plan check without any discretion around the standard itself. If there was any question about the intent behind a portion of it, then you would look at the commentary to clarify the intent.
So they do actually do that at the permit counter?
That,
And look at
yes, that
commentary.
can be done
Okay.
at the permit counter,
All right.
yeah.
Thank you.
Or more often than not, it comes into if you're figuring out if a review would be necessary. So if the standard can't be met.
All right, thanks.
Other questions? Okay.
Thanks.
I will just point out that in practice, I have found on many, many occasions that if you bring up the purpose statement, then they just say, well, that's just a purpose statement. So it can be interpreted more than one way in practice.
Goal exception, who views the goal exception?
The goal exception, we have a process in the city code for doing a goal exception, but it also has to be granted by the state. So it's a city and state goal exception. So it's a very high bar. There hasn't been a Greenway goal exception in the city of Portland. I don't know about other jurisdictions along the Willamette.
A hot dog stand will never get a goal exception.
No. It will not. That will not happen. Okay, Eli.
Well, I was trying to brainstorm a small change where the current language allows a structure that's 12 feet by 100 foot as a floating structure, and I've heard some, and only 4 of them, and that to provide floating structures for like a swimming area, it might be beneficial to have maybe 2 or 3 or 4 little smaller, much smaller structures that someone could have a lifeguard could stand there, you could dive in and off of it and just hang out on the dock. And so I proposed, totally last minute, you guys haven't had a chance to see this, probably, but that for item 3, there are no more than 4 structures in the central reach at one time, except that up to 4 structures with total area of 100 square feet or less, so that's less than the size of one of the ones that would typically be allowed, and within 300 feet of one another shall count as a single structure. So to allow little clusters of small ones instead of a large one. And we got feedback from last time that you always could do more structures if you go through the river review process. So I took a little look at that, and it's not that easy a process. It's a type 2X process. I don't know the fee. It's probably $3,000, 4 to 6 months. I looked at the list of submittal criteria. It's about 8 pages of list of things you have to provide, including some third-party reports. So I totally agree with that process. But if you're trying to do a small little dock to support a swimming area or a few of them, it seems like that would be an onerous process for the level of work done. So I was just trying to come up with some way that we could facilitate a smaller cluster of docks, floating structure, temporary
Sure.
floating structures, instead of, that would in area be less area than the 4 that would be allowed. I don't know if this is the best language for it, but I wanted to toss it out there as an amendment.
Yeah, so I just have a few remarks since we took a look at it, and then just let you guys can talk about it. So I completely understand the intent that you're trying to get at for it, and we were thinking about it in terms of wanting to make sure that the standard is also clear and easy for development services to implement. And so the way that I started to lean towards it was to remove the complication would be to allow for more than 4 structures total, but decrease potentially the size of each individual structure. So, you know, if you used the current standard, the number 5, 12 feet by 100 feet, and up to 4, that's a total of 4,800 square feet. So you could shrink the size of each individual, but increase more of them, and still, and still not go with more over water structure. So that was kind of where I was headed with it, to keep it simplified from an implementation standpoint. But I guess I'll let you guys
So I guess I don't understand how what you said is different than what Eli said.
So one of the concerns that I had just looking at Eli's, the text that he emailed over is that it read, you could have no more than 4 structures at one time with these things, or you could have up to 4 structures that are within 300 feet of each other, but they would be considered under as one thing because they're in close proximity to each other. And given that through a plan check, BDS would just be seeing one application for one thing, it would be hard to keep track of the overall square footage if you've got 4 individuals plus places where maybe you've clustered more than 4. It could just be, it's just a little bit more complicated. So I was heading more towards make each individual a little bit less, but say you could have more total. And if you could certainly cluster them. I mean, you can obviously put them close together or spread them out. So I think it's getting to the intent, but maybe just a little bit easier for BDS to keep track of it all.
Okay. So Mike's dying to say something, and then Michelle.
Dying, I'd like to say something. So Eli, under your regime, are you talking about the potential of 20 or 25 structures then for 4 different areas that may have 4 or 5 structures grouped?
Yeah, if you were to max out the current code, you could have 4 different locations within the reach.
Right.
Each one could have a structure up to 12 feet by 100 feet.
Right.
And what I've put out there, within 4 different areas within the reach, in each one of those areas, you could have 4 structures, which combined would be 100 square feet or less. So you would have
16 total.
Right, distributed over
Okay,
4 different
that's what I was
sites.
trying to figure out.
That's what I was getting to.
So is there anything that would get at sort of congestion or safety concerns if we had lots of little docks or platforms? Because I think your picture was the fire dock, right, with all the people on it earlier today? Okay, so, well, no, but there were all the people on the fire dock, but you've got the fire boat needs to be able to get out from there and maneuver, and the chase boats that serve at least the youth rowing club are tied up there. They used to populate the Holman dock, so I don't know if the fact that part of it got replaced means it's no longer comfortable to lay out on or not. But I'm just thinking as you get a lot of little docks there, I'm worrying about the shells and the dragon boats and the outriggers and the fire boats maneuvering.
Well, actually, if I'd been biking away from downtown, I could have taken a picture of the Holman dock, which was also covered with people. But I believe that this also would have to go through a review by the state water, what agency is it? There is an agency, Water Resources, which there's an agency that focuses on safety that a
There would
dock
be
also have to go
multiple
through.
reviews that would be necessary at the
Yeah.
state and federal level, absolutely. And I'll just point out that most of this is parks controlled property, and they're not just going to go put a whole bunch of facilities out. They would certainly be undertaking studies regarding safety and how to put a program together. So I think there's this isn't a recipe for them going out and kind of doing them all over. But it's trying to figure out what's the right level of flexibility under a standard versus what needs to go through review to make sure that the impacts to the natural resources are mitigated for. That's where this standard would lie, is sort of where's that division.
Okay, so it's how they want to manage their lease and what they can get permitted through the state as opposed to what they come to the city BDS counter and ask for. Okay.
Right, yeah.
So just a thought, one of the concerns about any structures like this is the shade predators, et cetera, et cetera. So I suppose you could make an argument that for smaller things would actually allow more light penetration and might actually have some less impact on fisheries.
Right, which is also where I was going with, we could do more total number of structures, but decrease the size of each individual. And that would get at, I think, the same idea, but still keep it under kind of an overall threshold.
But then it's kind of interesting to think about, so are we looking at a situation where it would be Portland Parks and Recreation?
In this, for the central city, it would be Portland Parks and Rec or OMSI are the two owners.
And I would think that it would be far more difficult to figure out how to anchor and put 4 structures versus 1, but that's, I could care less. I mean, they'll have to look at that in terms of what they're willing to put into resources to accommodate 1 or 4. So I don't have any big issue with it, frankly.
So is the intent, Eli, just to put more structures smaller in more places?
The intent is that sometimes you don't need a big old 120 by or 12 by 100 foot dock. That if you're trying to serve an area like Poets Beach, you might be better off with a few little, at maybe the boundaries of a swimming area, have a few little docks. And if we use up all the available docks in the whole Central Reach for one beach area, then anyone else is going to have to go through river resource review. That's the, and I don't know if this is the best. That's the intent, is so that you don't use up your dock quota with a bunch of little 10 by 12 foot.
Right, because you would max out the number you're allowed before you maxed out the total square footage, is what you're getting at, yeah.
Okay. A question. So if anyone wants to put a dock out there, they're going to have to work with Portland Parks, who in turn is going to have to work with the state, probably some Marine Safety Board. So there's not a simple regulatory process. What's the danger if we don't have any limitations? If we just say floating docks are allowed and we let Portland Parks decide? And Mike, if one year they go, oh my God, we're going to put 100 of these things out there, we could certainly shut it down for the second summer. But it seems hard to believe. I mean, we're wrestling with, is one big dock the right answer, or is 4 little docks the right answer? And since we have no data or evidence to know, I assume we would be shown if we knew what the potential is. I would, rather than have us pick a number, defer that decision to the Parks Department, which will have to deal with the public, will have to deal with the provider of the docks, that'll have to deal with the state regulatory process. And let's see what they decide is the right answer, because we don't have a basis. We're just guessing. So sometimes maybe no regulation and trusting our sister bureau to use wise judgment, I just defer to that rather than guessing at a regulation.
So I do have a response to that, unless if, Mike, you want to respond first. But I do have a response.
No, my response is I think we're going in the right direction with the possible amendment that Eli's put forward. I think there is a rationale for having fewer than more.
From our perspective, the shallow water areas that are the areas where people want to swim in the central city are critical habitat for a number of aquatic species. And the state and the federal, when they look at those, are required to look at endangered species. We have the ability to look at a more comprehensive suite of species when we're looking at these areas in terms of the impacts to natural resources. And what we're trying to do with the standard is balance out a minimal amount of impact that we think won't have, too much impact on the fish habitat, and we don't feel like we need to go in and review those. But at some point, we do need to take a look at the overall cumulative impact, because there may be too many of them overall, or size requirements. And the sizing that is in here now, the 12 feet wide, is based on science about letting light come in around the sides. So we have a lot of these circumstances where we've written standards for impacts, where the state and the feds also get involved in the review of those. So that's my perspective on.
So there is
regulatory
science. We
piece.
have some data. It's in our record. You can provide it that shows this size platform will provide enough light to not impact shallow water fish, but anything larger would. So there's some data.
We have information about size thresholds that have significantly less impact. I would say any overwater structure is going to have impact on aquatic species, but there's a recommended threshold at which there's significantly less impact.
So is this based on someone's?
Yep.
Oh, who's recommended impact? What agency?
So I can pull and provide that
I'm
for
just
you, the
curious,
background data.
who's
Yeah.
NOAA Fisheries, US NOAA Fisheries.
And Oregon Department of
Has
Fish
a
and
size limit
Wildlife,
for
and
docks
there's a
in-
number of
Right.
them.
And the bigger the structure, the less likely it will be permitted. There's one factor that Mindy didn't bring up, and that is, or I think she alluded to it, there are very few shallow water habitat areas in the Portland Harbor, very few. And so the concern is overdoing it in terms of a very limited resource. So there's a rationale, there's a scientific rationale, there's a natural resource management rationale. It wasn't just picked out of thin air. That there's a basis for it in terms of overall size and the number.
So we could, again, so the direction I was headed was allow more than just a total of 4 structures, but decrease the overall size so that we're still cumulatively staying within kind of a threshold of overwater structure total. I can't tell you right now what I think the right total number of structures are. So I guess one way to handle this would be is if people are comfortable with that general approach, then you could direct us to move forward with figuring out the individual components of it, but underneath of that intent.
So I'll make a motion to adopt the language that I proposed and invite staff, if they feel it'd be helpful between now and city council, to make it more enforceable or clearer, if that's helpful. So I guess I proposed the language that I sent, which would be to add on section N3, there are no more than 4 structures in the central reach at one time, except that up to 4 structures with a total area of 100 square feet or less and within 300 feet of one another shall constitute a single structure. So that's my proposal. And if there's any way of accompanying language to say that if it's hard to interpret or there's a better way of meeting that intent, then that could happen between now and city council.
Okay.
I'll second that.
Additional discussion? Gary?
A question. You spoke about a threshold of impact of covering surface water. The regulation as amended would allow for 5,000, roughly 4,800 square feet of dock area. How many total square feet of shallow habitat is there, and how close are we to any scientifically supported threshold with that limitation?
Sure. I don't have a number off the top of my head about the acreage of shallow water habitat in the central city off the top of my head, so I can't give that to you. And there is no specific data about how much total overwater structure is a threshold across the board. There is studies done on size of structures, and it's primarily related to how much light can penetrate underneath, which is related to predation. So it's places where predatory fish hide and pick off the juveniles as they're migrating out. So there's quite a bit of research about the size of structures and how much area you need for light penetrating. There is no information that I'm aware of that would take an area like this and say you can have so much overwater structure before you're having impacts on the fish. So we probably won't be able to pick a number that's based on science on that. It's going to be, what feels like a reasonable amount for standards versus when do we need to start looking at how those impacts are affecting the habitat.
So the 10 by 120 size, that's based on the science related to light penetration?
The 12 by 100 is.
Yeah, in a localized area.
And one critical thing.
Or the 12. The 12 is. The 12-foot width is based on that. The 100 feet was put in as an ability to be more flexible so that if parks wanted to have dual uses in one facility, like a place where people could saddle up with their kayak and swimming, so that the length is not based on the fish. It's based on flexible use. The width is based on fish.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mike.
And it's interesting, in the commentary, it specifies that the structure may only be located in the river during the in-water work period,
That's
which
right.
is July 1 to October 31st. I don't see that referred to in, well, I guess that's just a staff rationale. So that would be,
No, it is. It's number 1. Number 1 is that it can only be in the river July 1 to October 31st.
got it, okay.
And then we were just clarifying.
That's a really critical part right there.
But I will stress that fish are in the river
Right.
all the
You're
time. This is just the peak, that time frame is in between peak spring and peak fall migration.
Right.
Any additional discussion?
Point taken.
Okay, it doesn't seem like it, so Julie, let's go ahead and call the roll.
Okay. Backrack?
So we're voting on Eli's amendment?
Correct.
Yes.
Baugh?
Yes.
Hauk?
Yeah.
Larcell? Yes. Oxman? Yes. Rudd?
No.
Smith? Yes. Spivak?
Yes.
Talmadge?
Yes.
Schultz?
Yes. Amendment passes.
Okay.
A motion passes with the amendment.
Okay,
Sorry.
Rachel.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Rachel Hoy with the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. And if you want to take a look at Decision Table I, item 41 is what I'm going to be talking about. And this is an existing Central City Plan District provision. In the picture here, this is a North Pearl setback, and here's the area that it applies to between the Fremont and the Broadway Bridge, the area highlighted in red. What exists today in this area, we have maximum heights of 100 feet, and there's no bonus height. So I just want to walk you through the existing provision. And the language for the existing provision is in your table, and I'm just going to walk you through how it works today. So the current provision, we have a river setback in the central city that's 25 feet. And you can build a building that is up to 35 feet. Once you get above 35 feet, then you have to set back. And the way that would work, the example I'm providing you here, let's say you wanted to build a 75-foot building. For every foot above 35 feet, you have to set back a foot. So a 75-foot building today from the 25-foot setback would actually have to set back 65 feet. And if on the site today you can go up to 100 feet, you'd have to set back 90 feet. So that's the way the provision works today. It's been in place since 2008. And along this stretch, there actually hasn't been a property that has implemented this. There has been a development in the area, which I can show you a picture of if you'd like. But it came in before the provision went into effect. So we actually haven't seen how this would have played out. But the provision, I should say, was also a placeholder at the time. There were discussions that the Central City Plan was coming around. We were going to be working on it, and we were going to be looking at the whole city and the river setback. So today, through the Central City Plan, what we've proposed is a 50-foot setback. And so with the 50-foot setback, this provision does not work as well. They wouldn't work well together. So staff is proposing that we eliminate this provision because we feel that the new 50-foot setback meets the intent, and it certainly provides the space that staff was interested in seeing for the Greenway Trail, for natural resource enhancements along the river. And just to give you an example, so another change that we've proposed through the Central City process is that area in red that I showed you on the first slide. The base height remains at 100 feet, but we've also proposed that buildings can bonus up to 250 feet. So as an example, if we, with the 50-foot setback, if these provisions were to work together, if we were to maintain this existing provision, for example, a 100-foot building would have to set back 115 feet. Sounds good to me. So if someone then wanted to take advantage of the 250 feet, the bonus height, we'd have buildings setting back 265 feet. So the properties that I showed you between that Broadway Bridge and the Fremont Bridge, the area that where this provision applies, those properties, for the most part, range in depth from 200 to 300 feet. So that would make many of these properties undevelopable. So as I mentioned, our proposal here is we feel as if we've met the intent of, by increasing the river setback to 50 feet, we feel that we can eliminate this older provision because the two just don't work well together. And I'll just,
The,
if there are any questions.
The application area for this, is this along the river, like under the Fremont Bridge and north?
It is. Let me just show you back here again. So between the Broadway Bridge here and the Fremont Bridge,
Okay.
and all along NATO to the riverfront.
Go ahead, Mike.
So I came prepared to support the staff recommendation. After hearing the presentation, it sounds like we should apply North Pearl to the rest of the river. That sounds like a pretty good deal. Well, I only have one comment, and that is the 50 feet, as far as I'm concerned, is not even close to being enough to accommodate the trail and habitat and so on and so forth, but it's what we have. And I think it does make sense to be consistent throughout the central city. So I think the proposal makes a lot of sense, rather than having a different treatment here than the rest of the central city.
Any other thoughts, discussion?
Just an emotional comment. Having grown up in Portland for the last 35 or 40 years, what I'm seeing is just kind of the tunneling of streets and rivers by very tall buildings is really distressing, and particularly the idea that you have a 50-foot setback and then a sheer wall of 250 feet sitting next to the river. It just does not feel like a very appealing environment.
Second that.
For what it's worth.
Did you want to add something, Eli?
Well, I mean, I guess there's a lot of middle ground on this one. If it sounds like there's already some buy-in, but it always could be written that the first 25 feet of height beyond it gives you 25 feet more setback, and after that, you can go height's the limit. So I don't know, was that explored as one of the options?
Or
is it consistent? I understand the consistency thing, too.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the direction that we've been working as our team to be consistent across the central city, to expand the river setback to 50 feet. And in this particular case, we saw an issue with an existing provision and this new regulation working together. So in bringing this forward to you, and honestly, it's something that staff, we caught this as we were producing this new draft for you, and we knew that it was something we needed to fix. So the two just don't work well together. And we felt that the 50-foot setback is something that certainly we feel comfortable with at this point across the central city.
Yes, Mike.
Yeah, for Gary's comments and others, I mean, it is a bitter pill to swallow, as far as I'm concerned, in terms of how we treat the river. I think the critical thing here is I'm willing to support staff recommendation, but I also want to make it clear once again, for the 100th time, that 50 feet is not set in stone for, literally, for the South Reach or the North Reach. That we are not setting a precedent here for the South Reach and North Reach, where we have many more resources and much more opportunity to have a real treatment that the river deserves from a natural resource perspective and development.
Go ahead, Andre.
So the 50 feet is an absolute, or can they encroach?
I'm going to let Minnie respond to that. As I lean across, you can encroach by 5 feet as long as you offset by 5 feet somewhere else on the site. So you can encroach a little as long as you expand a little.
I'm a little uncomfortable at the 50 feet, but I'm really uncomfortable in encroachment at 250 feet and 5 feet. So is there a way for us to remove the encroachment, that it's absolute 50 feet?
For a minute there. I mean, certainly, you could take the encroachment piece out. We felt like it's important to have that flexibility because not all of these sites are perfectly rectangular, and it's a 50-foot from top of bank, which moves around a lot. And so we wanted to have some flexibility built in. So you can go 5 feet into it, but you have to also then add 5 feet more somewhere else so that it's just offset total across the board. So it's a nod to trying to be flexible within the sites themselves. Well, it's up to you. If you want to remove that, you can.
Is that a provision elsewhere in the code that you're just being consistent with, or is that specific for this area that you've added that?
There are other places in the code that have encroachment options. Yeah, there's some setback averaging in South Waterfront, and we had proposed this in North Reach as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
I made a run at that one.
Let's see.
Any other discussion items? Okay. So if not, I think what we've been doing is kind of taking a vote on the staff proposal. Julie, would you note that Michelle has recused herself from this vote, please? And I guess we've been technically calling the roll for each one, so let's do that.
We need a motion.
Do we actually have to have a motion? I guess. Let's go for it.
I'll move the
I move we adopt staff recommendations.
Second.
Okay. Additional discussion? Okay.
Backrack,
Yes.
Baugh,
No.
Hauk,
Yes.
Larcel. Yes. Oxman. No. Smith.
Yes.
Spivak,
Yes?
Talmadge. Schultz.
Yes. Motion passes. Thank you, Mindy. Rachel? Thank you.
So the next agenda item is related to Interstate 5 and Commissioner Smith. Joe?
So I hope we can dispense with this very quickly. I was motivated to request this discussion because in the mayor's State of the City address, he brought back up the idea of burying the I-5 East Bank Freeway. So that led me to two things. One was to ask the question, have we looked at whether that is consistent with the Rose Quarter, Broadway Weidler auxiliary lanes and that part of the project? And the short answer to that is yes. That was looked at as part of the Northeast Quadrant Plan, which I didn't remember, but staff dragged out the documents. And if you want to look at those, I'm sure Joe will be happy to show them to you, but I'm not sure that's necessary. I was just trying to be prudent and make sure we hadn't foreclosed something. But it also took me back to the original 2005 loop group study that originally made the recommendation to bury the East Bank Freeway and caused me to go read their recommendation. And one thing I just wanted to note in the legislative record here is that they recommended that before any improvements were made to the loop, and they did look at Rose Quarter, and that was part of their thinking, is that a master plan should be done for the whole loop. And I just want to note that we haven't done that. That project never got funded. It didn't happen. Nobody's done a master plan for the loop, but we are moving ahead with improvements to one section of the loop. I just want to register the objection in the record that we haven't really done our homework, and it's one more reason why I don't like the Rose Quarter project. And beyond that, I'm not asking for a decision of any kind, just wanted to get that out and in the record.
Thanks, Chris. Anybody? Okay. Great.
The next item is related to the Green Loop, and Commissioner Talmadge had some questions or an amendment.
So I've been receiving increasing community pushback to the Green Loop's inclusion in the Central City Plan, particularly you know, staff time being spent on it, and a recognition that while we may not be funding it at this point, by including it, designing it, saying we'll create it, it detracts from investment in projects like greening the Jade or the Lentz Green Ring. And my problem is that we're including this and spending the staff time on it when we should be prioritizing additional investments on the east side and similar projects. so I had proposed to remove the concept to create it. I'm very amenable to discussing amendments in terms of prioritizing projects on the east side in areas that, or with community-based organizations that are working with low-income communities, communities of color, and that are low in tree canopy, that are high traffic, high pedestrian fatality, have high traffic and fatality rates. I'm concerned that we keep investing in areas where people often have a great choice about reducing their carbon footprint, whereas we often have, you know, a lot of our communities already ride public transit, maybe not out of choice, but we're not providing additional investment or prioritizing those projects explicitly to give greater opportunity in those communities. And I think it's a false, and what I saw in one of these slides is that we'll start with the green loop in the central city and then we'll work off of it. And I think that's a really false choice. I mean, justice delayed is justice denied. That's what I said, and is we will keep putting these projects off, but I'm fearful that we have a created project, it's designed, there's staff support behind it, it will get on a funding list before, and potentially at a greater cost than some other projects.
Discussion? Chris? Andre?
So I guess I hear in this some echoes of some of the arguments I made around the freeway project, that, you know, we'd be much better off directing those resources to orphan highways in the outer parts of the city. I think I see a little bit of a difference in that, you know, I was making the argument that the freeway is actually counter to many of our policies, whereas the green loop reinforces many of our policies. So I'd have great difficulty removing the green loop from the central city, but I would, you know, be happy to have us, as we transmit this plan to City Council, make the point that, you know, things like the green ring and lengths that I've had an opportunity to ride. I'm not familiar with the Greening the Jade project, but I'd love to become familiar. That the kind of benefit we're looking for from the green loop should accrue to, you know, all of the communities in Portland, and we should be actively promoting and getting into the pipeline projects that do that. So I'd have no trouble supporting something that made that emphasis.
I would just echo that we have made the argument on streetcar and other things through the TSP that, you know, we have, we want the investment in East Portland also, and it seems to me this, I mean, I think this project, as Chris said, fits our goals here in downtown, but we should make equal investments in East Portland as we move forward on this project. We should be doing something in East Portland. So I don't know if we can amend this in what's there today, or this is a transmission that somehow there's an equitable investment policy around the green loop and something in East Portland. Because it will show up in the TSP, and eventually, I mean, it's just going to move forward. And I'm not saying it shouldn't move forward, but there ought to be some focus out in East County too.
Go ahead, Mike, and then I think Eli.
Yeah, I would strongly oppose taking the green loop out. I think it's perfectly reasonable in our letter of conveyance, as we do very often, to make whatever comments we want in terms of the necessity to invest in East County, East Portland, but I could not support removing it.
I guess I also would like to keep the green loop in. I did follow Maggie Talbot, the study that PSU did, and looked through there, and it was pretty pronounced in there, the perception of lack of infrastructure investment outside of the central city. But that paper didn't look at how much is actually spent, and I don't know the information on that. I would say that, having served on the Planning Commission for a year, my perception is that the amount of staff time is higher for issues that are of high import for affluent residents, and less staff time gets allocated to issues that are I'm looking at mass shelters and scenic view corridors. I mean, those are both had to be done, and they're different contexts. I mean, mass shelters on a short timeline, but it's clear the amount of staff resources that went to the two of them was hugely disparate. And I don't know what role we have on a planning commission to help shape that. I'm encouraged by the discussion on the Tiger Tualatin, the rail line and some other initiatives that come out of our bureaus that do focus on areas where less affluent people are impacted. But in terms of stakeholder groups, I think there may be an argument for us being involved in an earlier stage, just as a commission, maybe something for subsequent discussion, where the Bureau is prioritizing staff resources and where to write those grants to Metro, which happened a year and a half or 2 years ago on some of these projects, so that we can be ahead of it, rather than reactive when things come to us. But I would say that for this one, I think that the Central City plan is what's on the table now. The Green Loop is a part of it that I fully support, and I hope that we have new things come to the table to support equity, parts of the city where less affluent people live, and if we need to be more proactive on that, that we do so.
Katie, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that some of the quotes that were in that resonated with me a lot. I hear them all the time, is people saying things like, they build stuff downtown, they don't build it out here. So that's just something that you hear all the time. And I think that there's a feeling in Portland these days that that's probably not the way we should continue to always do it. But I do want to say that there is a plan called East Portland in Motion that was done 5 years ago, I think now. And actually, they've been plunking away at those projects and getting them done. Now, some of the big ticket items that are part of that plan don't tend to get into the budgets as much, like the one going over 205. And there's even one that would practically link to my home that goes over 84. I don't think they'll ever build that. But it's kind of a mixed picture. And the other thing is that East Portland Action Plan, for the most part, and I'm not sure if I necessarily need to bring that same ethics here, but tend to try not to squash other people's plans. We want what we want, but we also appreciate that other parts of the city want what they want. And I would like to see some emphasis made on the fact that there's all these tendrils going out and that they actually are not just drawn with pretty colors. They actually mean something. There will be a connection from East Portland into that great little loop that they want to build.
Michelle?
And I just wanted to say that I think more and more we are paying attention to East Portland, and the city and the county are devoting resources there. Maybe part of what needs to be happening, in addition to making sure we continue to keep our eye on that ball here, is doing a better job of publicizing what's already happening. I was in a meeting out with some people with the Metro president and the Metro COO, I think last Friday, but recently, talking about the project that's going on in Lentz in terms of targeting housing affordability preservation strategies that are going into place. And the Housing Bureau is being proactive in reaching out to people and helping them deal with the floodplain insurance rates and the risk of speculative buying out there, driving people out of that community, and at the same time doing floodplain planning, floodplain mitigation, ecosystem enhancement, and a commitment to bringing jobs to the area. So things are happening there. And I appreciate the idea that, East Portland needs what East Portland needs and has a right to, and the rest of the city can still reasonably expect investment. And I think the Green Loop is a benefit long-term to everyone. I think it adds to resiliency and increased connectivity. And it's just us and everyone else continue to keep our eye on it and making sure that ignoring part of the city of the past doesn't continue to happen. But I really don't see it happening anymore.
Right, and I hope you understood that I was agreeing
Right,
with
no, I
you.
appreciated that. It's just that,
Sometimes it.
having been here a long time, East Portland, there was a comment about, it can be underserved in infrastructure, but it's incredibly well organized, and they have a lot of allies. So I think people are paying attention.
Right. It's just part of the problem is just that if there's a deficit, and so even when stuff happens, you want to make sure to get the word out and make sure that it keeps happening.
Mike.
Similar argument was made with the East Bank Esplanade, which is one of the most spectacular things we have in the city right now. And it was the same argument was made. We shouldn't invest in that. We should invest. We need to do both. And I really hope we don't evolve into a situation where many years ago, every neighborhood was fighting the other neighborhoods to get their fair share. And that actually resulted in the lack of passage of bond measures, for example, for acquiring parks. So we clearly need to do both. The Green Loop, I think, is a amazing urban design opportunity, which I think will benefit everybody in the city. And I do think we need to make a statement that obviously we still continue to support, for example, Portland Parks is investing pretty heavily in East Portland. So need to do both.
I just wanted to make one comment that you guys have mostly covered everything that also was on my mind, with one exception is there are also individuals of low income and color that have, needs within the central city as well as East Portland. And so I think I am fully supportive of Chris's comment of, first of all, supporting the Green Loop and all that it's trying to accomplish. But it is so much more successful with its connections back out to Lentz and all the neighborhoods, and that they're all equally important. And so it's kind of where I am at. Go ahead, Maggie.
I think the approach I'm taking is it's not only equal investment, it's equitable. I think getting at Katie's point, right, is there is a deficit of these projects, a deficit of tree canopy, of bike lanes, of complete roads, that needs to be emphasized, and that while this is a good project, for all the reasons stated, I just want to ensure that by including it in the central city, we're not saying, we're doubling down in East Portland, right? If we have that investment, we're tripling investment in East Portland on projects like these. So we're actually moving all communities up and reducing the disparities. So I'd include that in the letter to the transmission letter.
Okay, Andre? And then I think Jeff.
I've argued long and hard for East Portland investment and actually more investment than downtown, because the disparity of investment when you really look at, especially transportation over the years, and has been stark. There just is not the billions of dollars put into East Portland. It's catching up, and there's no question. But what I look at for this project is, it's a great project for downtown. It's a good project. But really what I'd like to see is the excitement of the design community, Portland State, to go out to East Portland and take the same initiative and have a worldwide competition on how to do something out in East Portland. That then tells me there's very little investment in the Green Loop and doing the design, doing an international competition. That kind of an investment, I think, shows people in East Portland, the community, the city of Portland does care about them. And it's just not the focus downtown. It's not only investment, but it's actually putting time and effort and energy out there.
Jeff?
Just briefly, first I want to thank you, Maggie, and thank your courage for bringing up an issue and bringing it up in the context of maybe we should pull the Green Loop off the Central City Plan, knowing that would kind of catch attention. I thought that was a successful way to bring it up, and I applaud you for doing that. I think you made your point, even though we're not going to pull it off. But I like that. So I'll miss that passion and courage when you're not with us anymore. The concern that's being raised about funding and prioritization. I don't think as a planning commission, we have much control over how the city council and other agencies decide to spend money. The one thing we might have some ability to weigh in on priorities, and I don't think we've done this in the year and a half I've been on, is what is our bureau working on? And I don't know if there's a time and place where we have a discussion, or if there are options, or if it's sort of pre-designed, but if there's some new projects or projects of interest to the commissioners, do we ever have an opportunity to work with Susan, through you and your staff, and say, gee, this commission feels like Project A, maybe it's an East Portland project, should be a priority over Project B. And so I just would like some time to, this is an offline discussion, is there a time where we can help the Bureau set priorities, ones that aren't handed down to you by the city council, but where we might have some ability to discuss, and that would be the opportunity to raise things like, hey, I really want this East Portland project to get more staff time. So that's not something you need to address tonight, but I'd like to come back to that at some point and see where our role can be in managing those resources. We do have a direct role in managing.
So the only comment really would be just that you do, and you have, and that you've had a member on our Budget Advisory Committee almost every year, and we go into depth. For Teresa was on it. I don't know who else. Gary, didn't you come one year, a couple of years ago? Maybe you're trying to forget it. So we go into way too much depth, but and here's the projects here we get. What are the trade-offs? And looking at the budget, you're right in that, portions of the budget, especially up until about a year ago, were pretty fixed. Like we had a comp plan and the Portland plan and the Central City plan to do, and now we're starting to have some choices. So it may be a good idea, let's say next fall, to either have a couple members of this commission be part of the Budget Advisory Committee instead. Or to bring our budget here, not so much as the budget, but as our work plan, to let you know, here's the broad, but it's big and broad. And then the only other comment is transportation, parks, housing, planning and sustainability, and to a lesser extent, BES and others are all your bureaus. It's not just us. So very much so, all of them, the decisions you make, transportation, absolutely, you have a huge impact on them. So we should probably think about that too, a little bit too. How, if you're interested, we're happy to go into some depth. Thanks.
I'm interested, so there we go. Let's talk about it some more. Yep, absolutely. Gary?
Yeah. Maggie, I also want to acknowledge your courage in bringing this up here, because it's a difficult issue. In the quick read that I gave to the materials from Portland State, the thing that really stood out to me was the perception of what the downtown city is and is not doing out on the east side. And I think that's something that the commission really needs to listen to, and perhaps listen to in a much more direct way. But when things get to the point where you have a sociologist going out and doing studies to give feedback, it indicates a real disconnect between the government and the governed. And so, I think there's opportunities perhaps for this commission to do some more intensive and focused listening to some of those voices on the east side, to understand where these feelings come from, how actions that are taken, positive actions, are not being appropriately perhaps perceived among the folks who live there. But so I think there's a relationship opportunity there, as well as making a statement to the city council on our transmittal letter.
Very insightful as always, Gary. I said very insightful as always, and thoughtful. Thank you. I know, that's what I was like, oh, you'll be missed. So I believe, unless you're proposing a motion, you're comfortable with adding something to the transmittal letter, okay? That unless there's any other, this is kind of any opportunity, are there any other amendments or that anybody would like to propose? Okay. I'm not seeing anybody's hands up, so I think it's time for the exciting vote on the recommendation. Sally's going, yes, please.
Yes. We've been excited about this.
We're excited too. I know you're going to parse out what's going on for everybody.
Yeah, so in the materials that I sent to you, I listed out the 3 different votes that, and I have them here too. Yeah, thank you. And here they are. So we need to take these 3 different votes because of some professional conflicts that, that a few of your colleagues have here. So,
Should I just leave now? Number 1, okay. Recusing myself on the first vote.
okay.
You can stay. That's your lawyer, I advise you.
Okay, go ahead, Sally. Do you want to describe the 3 votes and then have us vote?
Oh,
Just
sure,
so everyone
sure.
kind of knows.
Okay, all right. So the first vote is related to some of the river and environmental kind of issues. And these are some things that are in your volume 2A2, and these are things that Commissioner Rudd recused herself from. So we need to take that vote. And then the second vote has to do with FAR and the master plan code. And these are some things that Commissioner Schultz has recused herself from. And then the final vote is to approve all of the remaining portions of volumes 1 through 6 as amended that were not included in prior votes 1 and 2, and to direct staff to make any remaining non-substantive changes to the package and forward it on to City Council as your recommended draft.
Exciting. So do we have any comments or questions about that, what we're about to do? And if not, were you about to make a motion, Chris?
I was. So
Fabulous.
I will move the first package under vote number 1 as written on the slide.
Second.
Additional discussion? No? Julie?
Yes.
Baugh.
Yes.
Howe.
Yes.
Larcel. Yes. Oxman.
Yes.
Smith.
Yes.
Spivak.
Yes.
Talmadge.
Yes.
Schultz.
Yes. Motion passes. Unanimously.
Yeah.
Now, I think I have to take over for a moment.
Yep, you do. So I'll go quiet.
So I will entertain a motion for vote number 2. If someone would like to make that?
So moved.
Is there a second? Seconded by Andre. Any discussion? Julie?
Backrack.
Yes.
Baugh.
Yes.
Howe.
Yes.
Larcel. Yes. Oxman.
Yes.
Rudd.
Yes.
Spivak.
Yes.
Talmadge.
Yes.
Smith.
Yes. Motion passes.
Unanimously. And the last vote 3, do we have a motion?
Move that we approve vote 3. Or,
Any discussion? Chris?
So I do have a comment on this one. This includes the TSP project list in this vote. And I continue to believe that the freeway project is a major flaw in the Central City Plan. And for that reason, I'll be voting no, because I want to signal to City Council that the support for this is not unanimous, that there is a serious objection. In doing so, I want to make sure that I am not tarring any other part of the plan, because there is great work here and I support the rest. So I want to make it clear that when I vote no, I'm voting no on a specific issue for a specific reason, and that should not be overinterpreted. Thanks.
is it possible to put those in the comments in the letter versus voting no? I mean, I'm just asking.
I think it's important enough that I don't want the vote to appear unanimous.
Okay.
Okay. Any other additional discussion? Comments? No? Julie?
Yes.
Does she have to call the name before you say it to have it count?
Yes.
Yes again.
Backrack.
Yes.
Baugh.
Yes.
Howe.
Yes.
Larcel. Yes. Rudd.
Yes.
Smith. No. Spivak.
Yes.
Talmadge. Yes. Schultz.
Yes. The motion passes. Thank you so much, all of you in the room, for all of your hard work. Sally, you did a phenomenal job shepherding this through. Thank you so much, all of you.
Thank you.
So we still have work to do. Wait, we still have work to do.
Oh, we're working, apparently.
Don't we still have work to do?
What?
The letter?
The letter.
Oh, yes. You're right. Sorry, I got
That's all right.
excited about
That's
cake.
all right. I know, it's exciting.
Well, no, this is important.
Okay. So Sally, you want to walk us through the outline?
So, you have a draft outline in front of you for a letter from you to the city council. And we just passed this out today. So we were thinking this could be the content of your letter, but we welcome any feedback on that.
Jeff?
It looks like this.
It's in your pile of stuff that maybe should have been on your table.
Outline for PSC letter to city council is the title.
Looks like it might be a long letter. Not that it shouldn't be, just.
Well, our last
So-
one on
So
comp
the-
plan early implementation was thorough. So.
So I'll just walk through it here.
That
So
sounds
the
great.
first section would just be a kind of a stating of some of the big ideas in the Central City Plan, and then a paragraph or so about the PSC process, and then the next 3 paragraphs are the kind of the key ones. The first one is some of the key amendments that the PSC moved forward. And there's a list here: inclusionary housing, height and FAR, river-related amendments, Central East Side, and parking. And there may be some additional ones that you feel are important to call out. These were ones that the team thought that you might want to highlight as things that you supported. And then the next section is about some topics that you supported that were somewhat challenging. And that's the heightened historic districts and maybe the green building costs. And then the next section is about things that you really struggled with, where there wasn't unanimous support. One, of course, relates to Commissioner Smith's Broadway Widler project, and then the Salmon Springs viewpoint, where you had a split vote, and that was back in September, which seems a long time
What was the
ago.
ultimate vote on that? 'Cause I forgot.
Excuse me?
Is it in or not?
It is not in.
We're not protecting the view.
That's what I thought.
Yeah. And then just a little encouragement statement at the end, so.
So if there's kind of quick gut reactions to the outline, one thing we've just talked about adding is a comment on the green loop.
Can we talk about the TSP?
Do you want to talk about it tonight or have her address it in here?
Include it.
Okay.
Okay.
I actually didn't understand what you said. The what?
The TSP.
TSP, okay.
Any other gut reactions, Mike?
Yeah, if I were writing it, I don't know. It just hits me that, we talk about the 50-foot setback, and then in the list of things that we're trying to accomplish with that, marine passenger terminal, and compared to moving forward on doing a better job of protecting, restoring the river, I just don't think of those as being even remotely equal things. So I'm just saying, if I were to write it, I would have maybe a separate category in terms of why a 50-foot setback versus 25 in terms of river health deserves a lot more attention than I see right here. You asked my opinion.
In the central city, Mike, or?
Yeah.
Oh,
Well, that's what we're talking about.
yeah, right.
So the focus of that section should be on the 50-foot setback.
Well, just that the environmental stuff gets lost in the list of things, in my opinion.
Would,
It's just like,
and I
oh, and there's a marine terminal too.
So just I appreciate what you're saying. Take them. If you were to take the marine passenger terminal out of the comment, does looping in, because I think there are a lot of discussion about more public access. To that discussion makes sense as a topic, or are you still saying maybe more there's one that's environmental and what we're doing for the environment, and then maybe some other river related?
Well, I'm just hopeful that there would be some, I mean, this is an outline. So in the discussion, I would hope it would really get at the importance of increasing that width for habitat, fish and wildlife habitat improvements, protection and restoration.
Well, maybe I'm poking at this a little bit. Is there, instead of Sally parsing river related things, like there's actually an environmental, it's like F, environmental, and it's what you're getting at. It's tree canopy, it's setback, it's eco roofs. It's the efforts we're doing throughout the city, not just at the river. And then there's certainly river related things. And
Yeah. Well, that's a good point. I mean, working on improving environmental conditions from a habitat perspective and access to nature and so forth in the central city is actually a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Okay.
Is there a section, because we had this discussion in inclusionary housing, we had it with green buildings, historic districts, TSB, about costs of development in downtown. And so is there a section to bring that up, or is that something we want to address later? Because in each one of those, we had a discussion about what does this add to development.
So actually, the green building related costs, we were thinking of talking about that whole cost conversation. So it's not just green buildings.
Okay.
So I think that I miswrote that. So I think I meant to include what you're saying, so. Thank you.
This may be a theme. As I was becoming immersed in this project, there's so many people are living downtown. Like the zoning increases. I'm not sure whether this fits in or not to a letter, but what strikes me is that if 50% of our new population people are going to be living in the central city, that's huge. And the zoning supports them for more people living there. And that's why we have green features, schools, like all these things you need to live your life within the central city is kind of is reflected in this plan, it feels to me. So I don't know if it's a big idea that I get struck by with this project.
I had a couple of comments on your IH, inclusionary housing. It's 3A. I was a little confused. It said followed city council lead, revised the bonus and transfer system. Didn't we already do that as part of the IH amendment that city council adopted? I thought all we're doing now is some very technical adjustments. And I just wanted to be sure, if I'm correct, I just wanted to be sure we're telling this. I don't want the city to think we've sort of done a substantive dive into inclusionary housing, because we did. We did some very minor technical fixes.
Right.
So I don't, that may have just been you, maybe I just putting words down, but
Okay. Well, I'll make sure we.
Yeah, I mean, the
we capture
substance
it.
of what we
Yes.
did, the council did it when they adopted the package last December, right?
Right.
Okay.
We did make some pretty major amendments to the document, and then city council then made additional amendments.
But all that's
And
going
then-
forward as part of this package is.
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
I just wanted to
Yep.
be sure I didn't miss something. And I had one other comment I'd like to suggest adding, if the chair's comfortable, since your signature will go on it. When we sent our recommendation letter to city council on inclusionary housing, we emphasized the need to kind of to reassess it or assess how it's doing and sort of have it come back to us within a year or so. So I would like to remind the council that we're still expecting, or maybe we're anticipating, as part of our work program next year, that will be part of the evaluation of how IH is doing. So that would be one suggestion I'd like to see included in there. I think it's consistent with what we said last December. So I just think it's important to carry forward prior
And-
policy recommendations.
And
we've made.
I do support that, but I'm trying to correlate it with the Central City Plan work specifically. Jeff a little bit. I mean, I understand we did IH amendments. I guess where I'm going with, like, was there an amendment that specifically, I can't remember, stated about reporting or something like that? And if not, I feel like we did that. We made the comment, and there's a lot of things all of us here could kind of try to reinforce through this letter, and I'm just a little concerned about
Okay. Well,
kind of.
to me, that's as important as the environment is to Mike, and I just think it was a major action that we were heavily involved in, and so I'm just proposing, and obviously you'll make the final judgment, that we carry forward and remind council, we have new council members, of important policy recommendations we've made in the past and carry them forward. Just like we're including in there the comment we've made before, and I think it's good we're going to repeat it, that all these development regulations have a cost. Just remind them, it's sometimes hard to quantify what each regulation's cost is, but cumulatively, they do have an impact on housing in particular. And I think it's good we're going to repeat that in this letter as I read your outline. And I have two others. Height in the historic district. And this is one, as we took actions months ago, and I've had a chance to think about them and talk to people about them, if we were redoing it, I think we made some of these decisions about lowering heights in, what do you call it, New Chinatown, Japantown, and on the east side. We did it because we were told historic review will never approve a building that tall. And we sort of went, oh, okay, well, if they won't approve it that tall, we'll lower it. But I think that's backwards, and I don't know, but I think we may be taking a look at following up on DOZA on what is the right role for the Historic Review Commission and what's our role. And so I would just want to make clear to the city council that in some of these decisions where we agreed to lower height in historic districts, that was sort of the rationale, at least I think that was the rationale, that we did it in response to the Historic Review Commission saying they won't allow it, and that, and again, this may be pushing further than everyone's comfortable with, is there a process where we're going to take a look at what is the right authority we should be delegating to the Historic Review Commission? And again, it's just pointing this issue out to the city council, because they're likely to hear from property owners saying, they've lowered my height. And I think it's important the city council understands we lowered height for a number of properties, basically, for what I just said. Historic Review Commission said, forget it, we're not going to allow it. So I think that's an issue that the city is going to have to wrestle with. And I think it's important we just explain that in a couple of sentences.
I think it's certainly a discussion point for city council. I can't say that that's why I voted on why I voted to low heights. And I think we'd have to make sure that, is that really why each one of us voted? Well, certainly Landmarks Commission made their recommendation. As I remember throughout the discussion, there's a lot of discussion about, okay, are they making the recommendation based on kind of fact? Like, does it actually hurt the historic district? Does it not? I think most of what we're hearing is not necessarily, so we certainly have the option at that point to vote otherwise, and I think
your outline says height in historic districts. What was the point you were thinking was important?
I thought that you should talk about. Well.
I saw the words, I thought through.
Well, I think there was a lot of discussion and debate on it. I'm just not sure I can agree on where you narrowed in on that. We voted the way we voted because of Landmarks Commission.
And I didn't mean to put words in the mouth of the commission. I was just saying that's an issue that's sort of out there, that we don't really control height in some respects in historic districts, and that, as I understand it, we're taking a second look at that, or a first look at that.
What? If you kind of go back to DOZA, I think part of the question is a question back of, we believe we've appropriately set heights. So the question is, should we continue to allow, moving forward, whether it's Design Commission or Landmarks Commission, to reduce heights as they see fit, or do we take that purview? Say, no, that's not in their purview. The heights have been set through Planning Commission. I think that's maybe the bigger issue you're trying to tease out. I could be wrong.
Well put, yes.
Okay.
But I think it comes up in the context of heights in historic districts.
I would be uncomfortable calling into question the role of another commission, just as if someone called into question our role in something. I think there's just a decorum there, and I just
I
wouldn't.
I agree with you, and I didn't mean to phrase it that way. And I wasn't trying to write the words. I was simply trying to make the point that, and again, trying to do it in as neutral a way as possible. We had some substantial lowering of heights in certain areas. And these were in historic districts. And just point out to the commission that ultimately, in these areas, it's not the plan, it's not what we put in code that controls, it's what these other entities decide is the appropriate height. I just want to somehow tease out that issue because I believe it's on the horizon for council ultimately to consider.
It is what we put in code that controls the
I
height,
think
right?
the point is if you say if the zoning code says that the building can be 100 feet, but then the other commission, historic or design, says no, 100 feet doesn't fit there in terms of being sensitive to the context, we're only going to allow you to go to 50. And so you have a developer who thought he could have 100 and now is being told he can have 50. So it's sort of a clarity issue. Like who actually decides? Can you believe the 100, or is it going to be whatever the design commission tells you, or whoever you appeal to from the design commission, so the city council?
Go ahead, Eli.
I have a way that might be handled in the letter would be to say that we recognize that some of the height limits we proposed in the central city plan are outside the range that we were indicated that might be approvable. And therefore, we recognize there's a potential conflict out there. The city council will need to resolve one way or the other. Otherwise, they will end up having projects appealed to them all the time. So I'm not sure how best to say it, but we could just say, this is something we can't resolve this for you. We're just a planning commission. This is something left for you to figure out, city council, going forward. Maybe that's not right?
Go ahead. We can resolve it because we can modify the zoning.
Eli's version of it, I think, is the closest to what your discussion really was. Because when you look at this, what the big move in the historic districts vis-a-vis heights was we lowered them. Because we found many where we had not done that after we had created a historic district. So the expectations from all the different stakeholders were off because the regulations weren't at all aligned. So that's what Eli just said, I think is spot on in terms of the big move that's in the plan. And we did lower them, not as low as some of the historic advocates and maybe recommendations from the Historic Landmarks Commission would have said is appropriate. And we did that on this principle that it's lower, so it's more within a realm, and we think there's an important role for discretion in there, which is what the Landmarks Commission gets to do. At the state level right now, just coincidentally, they're talking about rolling and tightening this whole system up. And if that were to happen, it would not surprise me if there's not a bigger push to come back to this commission and take a look at those historic districts and lower them down to what we really mean they are and eliminate, because if discretion's no longer going to be allowed, if you can't exercise that judgment through a process, then you better spell it out and it becomes a very precious number. We didn't do that in this particular version because we didn't have to. So that's, if I was to tell my version of what I thought your discussion was about, it was like that.
Jeff, you seem to imply you had another issue? Okay.
I don't know if it's under the struggled or supported challenging, but we made a decision in hindsight. We consider many months ago. This is the Northwest issue where we split Northwest into North and South, and we agreed to keep the FAR. Correct me if I'm wrong. We kept the FAR. Staff recommended on the South and reduced it in response to neighboring pressure.
So, Commissioner, that was not in the Central City Plan. That was in the comp plan implementation, and City Council overruled us anyway.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, well then, I'll take that off the table.
Okay.
I get confused with all the processes.
Mike.
Yeah, I apologize. I do have to bring this up. It's interesting, you know, when we get into the discussion about increased costs for development. Eli made a very important point. We have really a massive number of people who live in the central city. And in order to live in the central city in a reasonable manner, you have access to parks, you have access to a lot of things that some people refer to as amenities, I say are essential urban services. And so when we talk about, and the reason I'm bringing it up, because there will be a conversation apparently regarding green building and the potential negative impact by increased costs, we never talk about the increased value that we get out of those investments. It's always on the other side of the ledger. So I just think we need to be careful about how we analyze the so-called negative impact on development by the fact that we have parks, we have eco-roofs, we have increased urban forest canopy. We always talk about the negative impacts. We don't talk about the positive increased value of properties and the fact that people living in a denser situation in the central city need access to these things.
Okay. Any other comments? It doesn't sound like it. Sally, you've got your work cut out for you. With that, I'm going to adjourn the meeting so that we can celebrate.